Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the freezing, damp and generally miserable world of sleeping aboard a medieval ship during the brutal winter. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Seriously, between the freezing spray, relentless wind, and the fact that you're sleeping practically on top of other people who haven't bathed in weeks, this isn't exactly your cozy cabin in the woods scenario. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love knowing where my little ship of sleepy voyagers is anchored across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step onto the deck of a cog, a stout single-masted merchant ship, sometime around late November, and instantly, a bitter wind knifes through your clothes. There's a salty crust from sea spray already frozen into the corners of the sail. You pull your hood lower over your eyes, but it's no match for the cold that's already making your teeth chatter. Welcome to medieval maritime life, where every voyage is a gamble, and winter is less of a season and more of an endurance test. The cog you're on is about 80 feet long, which sounds decent until you remember it's shared by up to 30 or 40 other people, and most of them stink. The wooden deck is slick and uneven, patched with ice where seawater splashes up over the gunwales. As you stumble across, you glance down into the open hold where barrels of salted fish, hardtack and mead are stored alongside piles of coiled rope and bundles of supplies. Somewhere in that freezing dark pit is where you'll be sleeping. The wind howls through the rigging sounding like a chorus of groaning ghosts, which honestly fits, because it's not just the cold that gets under your skin, it's the sense of isolation. Your days, maybe weeks, from land. If something goes wrong out here, help isn't coming. The ship creaks and rocks beneath you with every wave, like it's tired of this journey too. It's not even night yet, but the sun is already low, bleeding orange into the grey sea. Soon you'll be bedding down, or rather, trying to, on the coldest, hardest surface imaginable, medieval wood, soaked in sea brine, shared by half the crew. But before you crawl down there, let's set the scene a little more. You're probably wearing every piece of clothing you own, several layers of wool, a heavy cloak, a linen shirt that hasn't been properly dried since 3 ports ago. Your boots are stiff with salt. If you're lucky, someone traded you a pair of felted wool socks back in Bruges. If not, your toes are already halfway to frostbitten. There's no central heating, no cosy hearth below deck. You've been warned not to light any fires, ever. Ships burn fast, and a spark from a lantern could be all it takes to send the entire vessel and everyone aboard into the icy black below. So no candles, no little warming braziers, no hot stones wrapped in cloth. The only heat you're getting tonight is body heat, which means you'll be packed in tight with everyone else, like salted fish in a barrel. That, or you'll be sleeping alone in a colder spot away from the group, which sounds better until you wake up frozen stiff. Now, you might think there's some kind of cabin, or at least a small crew room, right? Not exactly. The captain has a little space, barely larger than a closet, at the back of the ship. It's enclosed, with a pallet of straw and a thick woolen blanket. He might even have a sheepskin or a fur lining his bed. You, on the other hand, are assigned a portion of the hold. There's no real bed, just the floor, some burlap sacks maybe, and whatever you can scavenge for insulation. You toss your gear down, carefully avoiding the rats, and stake out your square foot of slumber space. If the ship rocks too hard, you'll slide into someone else, or into a barrel, or worse, into a puddle of something you don't want to identify in the dark. There's also the problem of moisture. Ships aren't dry places, even in summer. In winter, everything is damp, your clothes are damp. The wood under you is damp. The blanket you huddle under smells like mould and brine, and is, of course, damp. You roll yourself into a human burrito of damp wool and scratchy linen, press your body against a crate for support, and try to forget that the guy next to you has been coughing for 2 straight days. Fun fact, medieval sailors actually carried waxed cloths or tarred canvases to drape over themselves at night. Not exactly a down comforter, but it helped cut the wind and kept some of the wet out. Some even used oiled sheepskins, wearing them like cloaks during the day and sleeping under them at night. But all of these things came with the added bonus of smelling exactly how you'd expect. Historically, most medieval ships weren't really designed with human comfort in mind. They were tools, built to carry cargo, not people. So sleeping arrangements were an afterthought. If the hold was packed, you might have to sleep out on deck. in the winter, with sea spray freezing to your face. And here's where the historical debate kicks in. Some scholars argue that crews rotated sleeping schedules, so the hold was never completely packed. Others believe people just crammed in wherever they could. There's not a ton of surviving documentation, probably because most medieval sailors didn't write memoirs, or survive long enough to bother. As night falls, you tuck your hands under your armpits and pull your cloak tight. You feel the ship lurch with another wave, and your stomach flips. Someone below curses, then vomits. A small blessing. The stench of the sea wind is so strong it almost covers the human smells. Almost. You close your eyes, your breath fogs in the dark. You try to imagine a warm bed, a crackling fire. You try to imagine the shore, but you know it's still a long, long way off. And tonight, this wooden coffin, floating on an unforgiving sea, is the only bed you've got. You wake up groggy, stiff, and already shivering, which is impressive considering you never really stopped. The cold isn't just in the air, it's inside your bones now. You try to stretch, but immediately bump into a fellow crewman who grunts and rolls away without opening his eyes. Every joint aches like you've spent the night fighting a pack of angry goats. Your jaw is clenched from the chill, and you're pretty sure your nose has gone numb. You touch it just to check. Yep, numb, but still attached. Good start to the day. You sit up slowly, careful not to knock over a sack of onions, acting as a makeshift wall between you and someone else's corner of the hold. The wood beneath you is still damp, because of course it is, and your blanket is suspiciously heavier than it was last night. You give it a sniff. Brine, mildew, and something else you'd rather not identify. The truth is, on a medieval ship, nothing ever truly dries. Moisture clings to everything like a jealous ghost. There are no towels, no heated drying racks, and absolutely no chance of catching a whiff of anything fresh. Sleeping arrangements are democratic, if by democratic you mean chaotic and unfair. The higher-ranking crew members, first mate, navigator, quartermaster, get slightly better spots. They're usually closer to the stern, where it's marginally warmer and a little less loud. You, on the other hand, are just a deckhand. That means you sleep where there's space, and if someone else wants your spot and outranks you, you move. Forget beds. Forget even straw mattresses. The best-case scenario involves a spare coil of rope to use as a pillow. Most nights, you curl into yourself like a shrimp, and try not to roll into someone else's elbow or boot. There's a reason sailors learn to sleep in tight knots, literally. You'd bend your body into whatever shape would keep you from sliding across the hold every time the ship hits a wave. Now, let's talk about sleeping posture. Lying flat. Only if you have space and you're willing to take the risk of a rat mistaking your face for a footpath. Curled in a fetal position is more common, partly to preserve body heat, and partly because it's just instinctual when you're freezing. Some guys sleep sitting up, backs against barrels or beams. Not because it's comfortable, it isn't, but because lying down means your body touches more cold wood, and the cold wood always wins. A lot of people ask about hammocks, and here's the sad news. They weren't in widespread use on European ships until the 16th century. Right now, you're centuries too early. No gently swinging cradle to rock you to sleep here. Just wood, salt, and the smell of unwashed humanity. There is, however, the occasional makeshift sling, a canvas or rope net suspended between support beams, but those are rare and usually reserved for someone who lost a bet or a limb. It's worth noting that personal space was practically non-existent. You'd think that sleeping shoulder to shoulder with the same 30 guys every night would create a sense of camaraderie. Sometimes it did. Other times it just meant more fights broke out over who farted or who stole someone else's waxed cloak to use as a blanket. People snored, they muttered in their sleep, they kicked, they drooled. And if someone had lice or fleas? Congratulations, now everyone has them. You look around as the rest of the crew begins to stir. A few of them are rubbing their arms briskly, trying to get blood flowing. Others are already outside, scraping ice off the deck with dull blades and muttering curses that would make a bishop blush. You think about staying under your blanket a few more minutes, but that's a quick way to get kicked. On a ship, everyone works. Sleep is a luxury, and too much of it makes you look lazy. If you're caught still snoozing when the bells ring, don't be surprised if a boot meets your ribs. Historical fact: some ships implemented a kind of shift-based sleeping system. The day was divided into watches, and while some of the crew worked, others slept. This rotating system meant you weren't always sleeping at night. Sometimes your night happened during midday, in full light. With all the noise and chaos of ship life happening around you, Not ideal, but at least you weren't standing on the forecastle with sleet slapping your face. As your stomach growls, you consider skipping breakfast. Not out of choice, because it's probably just cold porridge or rock-hard biscuit, but because even sitting still for too long risks losing body heat. Food helps, sure, but only if you can eat it fast enough before it freezes to your fingers. You pull your scarf tighter and make your way to the mess area, if it can be called that. It's just a cleared space where barrels double as tables and everyone eats standing up. Someone passes you a chunk of salted meat. It's chewy, cold, and tastes like despair. While you chew, let's dip into one of the more fringe facts. Some sailors believed that sleeping too long in the cold would freeze your spirit. Not just your body, your actual soul. There are reports of crew members waking people up aggressively, not just to keep schedules, but out of fear that the sleeper would never wake at all. It's half superstition, half very real concern, because hypothermia doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes the last thing you feel is warm, comfortable drowsiness. Then you're gone. And this brings us to one of the enduring debates among maritime historians. Did the average sailor sleep better or worse at sea than on land? It sounds like a no-brainer, right? Of course it's worse. But consider this. On land, peasants often slept in overcrowded cottages with animals, without chimneys, and exposed to many of the same elements. Some argue that at least on ships there was structure, a routine, a duty to perform, and for some that rhythm provided a strange kind of comfort. You finish your meal and brush crumbs off your lap. Already the sky's going slate grey again. It's hard to tell whether it's morning or late afternoon. The sun doesn't so much rise in winter as it lurks behind clouds, barely making an appearance. You're tired. You're always tired. But you'll sleep again in 6 hours. Maybe. For now, it's back to work. As you climb up from the hold to face another icy day, you realise something important. This isn't just sleeping in winter. It's surviving. Every night you get through is a win. Every dreamless, shivering slumber in that cramped, swaying coffin of a ship is another night you beat the cold, the sea, and the odds stacked against you. You've lost track of how many nights you've spent on this ship. Time gets weird out here. Days blend together, and sleep isn't really a solid 8 hours anymore. It's a patchwork of half-dreams, interrupted by groaning wood, yelling sailors, and the ever-present slosh of seawater. You're always cold. Even when you're sweating from hauling ropes or scrubbing the deck, there's a chill underneath it all, like your body's given up on ever being truly warm again. So tonight, when you crawl back into your little corner, you're determined to hack the cold. If you're going to shiver yourself awake every hour, you might as well go down fighting. You start with layers. That's your first defense. You wear everything you have. First, the linen shirt that's basically fused with your skin at this point. Then a thicker wool tunic, still slightly damp from a wave that slapped you across the chest mid-shift. Over that goes a short cloak that used to be brown but now exists in that muddy grey colour shared by most of your belongings. Wool trousers, patched at the knees. 2 pairs of socks, one of them with holes. You wrap strips of cloth around your feet for extra insulation, then pull your boots back on. They're stiff from cold and salt, but they'll hold your body heat, or at least that's the theory. And here's the trick of the night. You smear a little goose fat along your chest and the back of your neck. It's disgusting. It smells like old meat. But it creates a seal that traps warmth, and in the brutal logic of medieval winter survival, function beats dignity every time. Some of the older sailors swear by it. They talk about rubbing animal fat on their feet before slipping into wool socks, like some kind of greasy prehistoric skincare routine. Then you pull your blanket over you, if you can even call it that. It's a patched-together mass of cloth, leather scraps and burlap. A few stolen bits of fur sewn in at the corners. It doesn't cover you fully, so you curl up tight, arms tucked in, knees pulled toward your chest like some primitive nesting creature trying to fake hibernation. Your breath fogs in front of your face, a constant puff, puff, puff in the dark. You try to think warm thoughts, a fire, a heavy quilt, the kitchen hearth from your childhood, even if you can't really remember it. Just the idea of warmth is enough. But those thoughts don't last long. A drip from the ceiling hits your forehead. Cold, sharp, constant drip, drip, drip. You roll over, only to press your elbow into the ribcage of the sailor next to you, who grumbles something about fleas and coughs twice into the darkness. You lie there, blinking into nothing, and think, this is the most intimate misery you've ever known. Everyone's in the same horrible soup, cold, wet, tired, and pretending they're asleep. Sometimes someone mumbles a prayer. Sometimes there's a fart, followed by muffled laughter. But mostly it's just the groan of the ship, the creak of ropes, and the ocean slapping the hull. Let's pause to appreciate a historical tidbit. While the rest of the medieval world had fireplaces and featherbeds, okay, only the rich did, sailors were out here perfecting the art of sleeping under impossible conditions. And goose fat wasn't the only trick. Some sailors stuffed hay or straw into their tunics for extra insulation. Others used bits of sailcloth as makeshift sleeping bags, tying them tight to keep the heat in. If you were crafty, you might trade a few dried figs for a strip of rabbit fur. Everything was bartered, everything had value, especially anything that made sleeping in this floating freezer box a little less horrible. Now, there's a debate among historians about just how common these tricks were. Some argue that most sailors were too poor to afford extras like furs or even proper wool. Others say seafaring cultures developed whole subcultures of survival techniques, passed down like sailor folklore: how to fold your cloak to block wind, where to sleep to avoid the drips, which oils or animal greases worked best on your skin. It's hard to know for sure. Written records are rare, especially from the lower classes, and the few that exist were often written by captains or clergy who weren't exactly sleeping on the floor of the hold. Back in your corner you adjust again, trying to block the draft that's sneaking up from the edge of a broken plank. Your fingers feel like they're turning to stone. You stuff them under your arms, wiggle your toes inside your boots, and resist the urge to groan out loud. Instead, you listen. Someone's whispering in the dark, maybe praying, maybe telling a story. The voice is low and rhythmic like a lullaby, and for a moment it makes everything feel a little less awful. Quirky fact time. Some sailors believed in sleep spirits, little invisible creatures that stole warmth from your body while you slept. The only way to keep them at bay? Sleep with a piece of iron near your head, a nail, a knife, a buckle. You glance at the small blade tucked into your boot and wonder if that counts. Probably. Superstition or not, it gives you a weird sense of comfort, like you've done one tiny thing to tilt the odds in your favour. You finally start to drift, not into sleep exactly, but into that hazy place where your brain stops caring. Your body aches, but you're too tired to notice. The cold is still there, but it feels like background noise now. You dream, or maybe just hallucinate about warm stones and summer wind. Someone sighs in their sleep and it sounds like a breeze through pine trees. You don't smile, but the corners of your mind soften. Then the ship lurches hard to starboard. A wave crashes. Something crashes overboard. You're rolled into the side of a barrel and someone else rolls into you. Elbows, knees, a flurry of whispered curses. Everyone adjusts and resettles like a pile of angry cats being stirred by a stick. You blink. You're awake again, or close enough. And this is the cycle. Layers, grease, huddling, drifting, waking, shivering, adjusting. Every night is a battle. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just an ongoing, bone-deep negotiation between your body and the sea. You're not sleeping so much as outlasting the hours, one by one, until the next watch, the next wave, the next patch of sunlight, the next hard biscuit. It's not rest, but somehow it's enough. You don't notice the hierarchy until it slaps you in the face. Figuratively, though the literal slap might still be coming if you get too close to the wrong bunk. See, sleep on a medieval ship isn't just a matter of staying warm and not sliding into a puddle of fish guts. It's politics. Who gets to sleep where, when, and with what kind of covering is a direct reflection of your rank, usefulness, or who you know. And out here, under a canopy of icy stars and creaking beams, social order matters just as much as sails and ropes. At the very top of this damp pyramid is the captain. He gets a cabin, not a big one. Don't picture a king's chamber, but it has walls, a door, and occasionally a shuttered window. Luxury. Inside there's a real bed. Maybe not a full mattress, but at least a straw-stuffed pallet raised off the floor. It's dry. It might even have a fur throw or a layered woolen blanket. The captain might own a feather pillow, probably pilfered from somewhere fancier. He sleeps with relative quiet and privacy, only interrupted by the sound of the sea and the occasional terrified sailor bursting in with news of a cracked spar or an approaching storm. You, of course, will never see that cabin. It's forbidden territory unless you're summoned, and no one wants to be summoned at night. Next down the line are the officers. First mate, quartermaster, maybe the ship's carpenter if he's particularly valuable. They bunk closer to the stern, where there's less movement and more shelter from wind. They get the best corners of the hold. If you're a favourite or just lucky, you might get to sleep near them, which usually means fewer rats and a little more warmth. Sometimes they've built crude partitions, using crates or barrels to mark their space. Sometimes they hang bits of canvas to simulate privacy. You can still hear everything, of course, but the illusion is comforting. Then there's you, and everyone like you. Sailors, deckhands, rowers if the ship has oars. You sleep wherever you're told, or wherever no one's already sleeping. There's no assigned bedding, just open floor, rope piles, or maybe a tangle of sailcloth that someone abandoned during a storm. You quickly learn which spots drip the most, and which ones get the worst drafts. You also learn not to take someone else's spot unless you're prepared to defend it with your fists or a splintery belaying pin. Even within the lower ranks there are unspoken rules. The bigger guys usually take the outside edges so they can stretch out. The older sailors huddle together, telling themselves their experience earns them a warmer patch of deck. Newcomers, like you, get the dregs. You might sleep half under a staircase, or curled around a barrel like a cat that's lost all its dignity. And don't even think about asking for a blanket. If you didn't bring it aboard, you're not getting one. Sailors guard their blankets like treasure, even if it's just a hole-ridden wool sack. Some stitch their initials into the corner. Some sleep with it tied around their necks during the day so it never leaves their sight. Theft isn't just frowned upon, it's punished. And on a ship, punishment tends to involve rope, knots, and bruises. Now, a fun little historical nugget. Some ships had a dedicated sleeping rotation that wasn't just about keeping watch. It was also about managing space. Too many bodies in the hold at once created more heat, yes, but also more tension, more noise, more smell. Some crews split into watch sleeps and watch works, creating a rotation that gave each group a few hours of uninterrupted, if unpleasant, rest. Scholars still argue whether this was common practice or only used on larger vessels, but either way it adds another layer to the strange bureaucracy of shipboard sleep. Another fringe fact? On certain merchant vessels, the cook sometimes had a hot corner, a spot near the galley where the residual warmth from meal prep lingered. Sleeping there was prime real estate, though it came with the risk of waking up smelling like onions and fish. But hey, warmth is warmth. Back in your little rectangle of shared misery, you try to make yourself as small as possible. There's a guy named Hugo on your left. He snores like he's choking on gravel. To your right, someone's feet are uncomfortably close to your head, and their socks are clearly suffering from exposure. You close your eyes and try not to inhale too deeply. It doesn't help that the boards beneath you are shifting, always. Every wave makes the ship groan and your body sway. It's like trying to sleep in the belly of a restless seasick whale. One of the biggest myths people have about medieval ships is that once you were below deck you were sheltered. Not really. Most cogs didn't have full decks stretching from bow to stern. Many were open to the elements, with only partial coverings or makeshift shelters built from spare sailcloth. Some sailors even slept above deck if space below was too cramped or wet. That meant exposure to freezing winds, snow, sleet, and the occasional rogue wave. The only upside, slightly fresher air. The hierarchy even extended to wake-up calls. Officers were roused gently, sometimes with a whispered word or a light touch. You'd be kicked, shouted at, or doused with cold water if you overslept. Sleep was a privilege you earned by being important or at least useful. For the rest of you, it was a temporary suspension of suffering, ended not by nature, but by the boot of a superior. It's funny, in a grim sort of way. Out here, social status boils down to who gets to sleep with the least amount of misery, and yet, no one's truly comfortable. Even the captain, up in his cabin, sleeps with a dagger under his pillow and one eye open. The sea doesn't care about your rank. A storm will toss you all like toys, and in the end, when the mast cracks and the deck floods, everyone's bedding ends up in the same place, soaked, splintered, and lost to the deep. So tonight, when you wrap yourself in your damp blanket and stuff your hands into your armpits for warmth, you don't waste time being jealous of the officer sleeping with a cloak of fur. You just close your eyes and hope that this time the wind dies down, the waves settle, and no one steps on your face during the night watch. You've been aboard long enough now that you start getting questions, quiet ones, whispered in the dark when sleep won't come, and everyone's too cold to pretend they aren't listening. One of the younger deckhands leans over and mutters, "Hey, what about hammocks? Don't they use those on ships?" His teeth chatter mid-sentence. You groan into your damp wool sleeve. Not this again. Here's the truth, and it's going to disappoint anyone raised on romantic notions of sea travel. Hammocks, those gently swaying fabric cocoons you see in every pirate movie, aren't here yet. You're on a medieval ship, solidly 13th or 14th century, and hammocks are still centuries away from being standard gear. The idea's floating around in the corners of the world, but it won't become mainstream on European ships until after sailors encounter them in the Caribbean, where indigenous peoples were already way ahead of the game. For now, you're stuck with the floor, barrels, ropes, or, if you're feeling adventurous, trying to wedge yourself between two cargo nets and hoping you don't wake up face down on the boards. Nobody's swaying peacefully in a canvas sling with a breeze on their cheek. You're all curled up on whatever semi-dry surface you can find, pressed into awkward positions that leave your back and neck feeling like they've been wrung out like laundry. The hammock myth persists, though, because it feels so right. Ships rock. Hammocks sway. It makes perfect sense. And when people hear you're sleeping on wooden planks next to crates of salted cod and pickled cabbage, they don't want to believe it. It just sounds too barbaric. Which honestly it is. But there are some experiments going on depending on where you are. In southern Europe, particularly among the Portuguese and Spanish by the 15th century, there are early attempts at suspending canvas sheets from beams to create sleeping slings, more like makeshift cradles than proper hammocks. These are crude, narrow, and don't always work well. In rough seas, they could swing violently or even dump you mid-sleep onto a sailor below, earning you a swift punch and a few new bruises. You tried it once. There was a fraying bit of spare sailcloth, and you managed to tie it between two support beams down in the hold. It sagged in the middle like an old man's spine, and the second you tried to climb in, the knot slipped. You hit the deck with a thud, dislocated pride and all. That was the last time you tried to outsmart the floor. Instead, the go-to bed remains the same. Rope coils, burlap sacks, leftover sail scraps, or nothing. You've learned to appreciate the texture of coiled hemp. It leaves deep, angry lines in your cheek, sure, but it's oddly springy, and you'll take what you can get. If you're lucky enough to sleep near the spare sail storage, you might roll yourself up like a sausage inside the canvas. It smells like fish and tar, but at least it blocks the wind. And as for ship design, these medieval hulks weren't built with human comfort in mind. Most cogs have no designated sleeping quarters at all, aside from the captain's cabin, and maybe a tiny space near the stern castle for high-ranking officers. The rest of the hold is cargo first, humans second. If there's a dry spot to lie down, it's only because the crew wasn't hauling anything particularly large that week. There's some debate among historians about why it took so long for the hammock to catch on. One theory is that it simply didn't occur to European sailors, despite the obvious benefit, because most of them were farmers or labourers before going to sea. They slept on hay, on floorboards, or in shared beds back on land, and their expectations were already low. The idea of hanging something from the ceiling and climbing into it seemed strange, maybe even suspicious. Another theory is logistics. Medieval ships didn't have the internal structure to support hanging a dozen hammocks without getting in the way of ropes, cargo, or movement. By the time naval design caught up, the hammock revolution had to wait for new influences, namely contact with Caribbean and South American cultures that had mastered the art of swaying off-the-ground sleep centuries earlier. So you're stuck in the in-between, not poor enough to sleep on the open deck during a storm, but not important enough to earn even a straw pallet. You've got your square of floor, your layer of cloth, and maybe, just maybe, if the night's calm and the wind shifts in your favour, you can stack a couple of ropes together for a pseudo-pillow. But then, every now and then, someone gets creative. One sailor pulls out a length of fishing net, threads it between a couple of upright barrels, and wedges himself in like a cocoon. It looks absurd, but when he wakes up without a bruised hip or cold feet, everyone suddenly wants in on the idea. The next night, someone tries using 2 oars to support a crude canvas sling. It works, sort of, until the ship lists hard to port and he spills out like a sack of onions. Lots of laughing, no real injuries, but the point stands. People will try anything to improve their odds of rest. Let's sprinkle in a fringe detail here. There were reports, unverified, but tantalising, that some shipboard carpenters began carving personal sleeping platforms into the walls of larger vessels. Nothing fancy, just a shallow shelf, wide enough to curl into, tucked between support beams or above the cargo. But for those who knew about them, these secret ledges became the gold standard of hidden comfort. Some even carved symbols into the wood. A little star, a fish, a mark that meant, "This is mine, don't even think about it." You look up now, squinting in the dark, and wonder if any of the beams above you hide a hidden ledge. Probably not. If there were, Hugo would already be up there, snoring like a dying donkey. You lie back down, arms crossed over your chest, cold air sneaking into every gap between your layers. No hammock, no pillow, no comfort. But somehow, eventually your body goes slack. Your mind floats for a while, drifting somewhere between exhaustion and surrender. You don't dream of swinging peacefully between two palm trees. You dream of a floor that doesn't shift, a room that doesn't creak, and a blanket that doesn't smell like old cabbage. But most of all, you dream of warmth. You wouldn't think the bottom of a ship could get any worse, but then winter rolls in proper. The kind of winter that makes your teeth ache just from breathing. That hold, the very one you've been crawling into every night, already miserable and wet, transforms from deeply unpleasant to why am I suddenly praying for frostbite so I can't feel my legs anymore. Welcome to the underbelly of a medieval cog in December, where cold settles like a second skin, and the idea of sleep becomes more of a grim ritual than a source of rest. The hold is part storeroom, part tomb. The ceiling is low, meaning you can't stand all the way up, and the wood is slick with condensation from the clash of breath, body heat, and ice-cold air. It smells like mould, fermented cabbage, wet wool, and people. Too many people. The barrels are stacked tightly, packed with salted fish, wine, oil, grain. And when the barrels are full, sailors sleep around them. When the barrels empty, sailors sleep inside them. The lucky ones anyway. You find your usual spot by the wall, beneath a stack of planks and near a net filled with cured meat. There's a faint smell of garlic hanging in the air from a broken jar someone dropped last week. It could be worse. Hugo's spot is near the pickled herring, and he smells like it now. You roll out your sailcloth mat, shove your satchel under your head, and prepare to resume your nightly battle with the floor. But this time of year, everything's harder. The air has weight, not in a poetic way, in a way that literally makes your lungs burn when you breathe too deep. Every inhalation is sharp, dry, and cold enough to make you wince. You can feel your breath turning to ice in your beard. You wrap your scarf tighter and pull your hat down to your eyebrows. All the usual tricks start to fail. Even the goose fat has stopped working. Your body just can't generate enough heat to hold on to it. You feel like a lizard that wandered too far north. Below deck it's quiet now. Nobody talks much in winter. Talking means moving your lips, which makes them crack and bleed. The jokes are gone. The songs, even the filthy ones, fade away. Everyone just huddles, curled into themselves, waiting for the few hours they're allowed to sleep to pass without frostbite or worse. You lie on your side, knees drawn in, back pressed to the wall. That helps a little. Wood is better than air somehow. At least it holds a trace of body heat. You pull your cloak over your head and try to forget that you saw frost forming on the inside of it earlier. Not from outside, from your own breath, freezing in the folds of the wool. That's how cold it is. Let's talk about construction for a second. The hull of a medieval cog isn't exactly built for insulation. The planks are thick, sure, but they're fastened with iron spikes that conduct cold like tiny frozen knives. Any gap between the boards, no matter how well caulked with tar and tow, leaks air, especially when the wind is biting off the North Sea. There are no floorboards in the hold, just the inside of the hull. No padding, no shock absorption, just timber, salt, and chill. And let's not forget, there's no real floor plan. You're sharing your sleeping area with cargo, rats, sometimes livestock, and a rotating cast of other miserable humans. Someone nearby is always coughing. Always. The kind of cough that tells you they're not going to make it through another month of winter. Someone else mutters in his sleep, over and over, the same few words, like his dreams are stuck on a loop. You wonder what he's seeing. Probably not palm trees. Here's a historical fact that really puts it into perspective. Medieval sailors could spend weeks, even months at sea during the coldest parts of the year. While most folks on land had fireplaces or at least a shared hearth, you've got nothing but your own body heat and whatever you can scavenge to insulate yourself. And nobody cared. If you died from exposure on the voyage, your belongings got split up, your body got dumped overboard, and your name maybe made it into the ship's log with a note like "lost to the cold," if anyone bothered. Now here's a weird one. Some crews developed little winter rituals to try to bring luck against the cold, like placing a bit of salted bread in their boots before sleep, or tying a bit of red string around their wrist. One ship's log even describes a sailor who refused to sleep in the same spot twice, believing it invited the winter ghost to find you more easily. Is any of it real? Probably not. But when your bones are rattling and your fingers are stiff as iron rods, you'll try anything. And in the midst of all this, frost on the beams, silence from the crew, the occasional squeak of rats, you try to sleep. Not because you expect to wake up refreshed. You won't. But because it's the only escape. The only pause in the long, unrelenting misery of the cold. You press your face into your sleeve, inhale the damp wool, and try to count the seconds between the groaning of the ship's timbers. The rhythm is oddly comforting, like a heartbeat, only louder and more ominous. Sometimes, in these frozen moments, you think about land. Not the bustling ports with taverns and shouting merchants, but land itself. Dirt, grass, a floor that doesn't move, a room that holds heat, a ceiling that doesn't drip salt water on your forehead at 2 a.m. You'd give up your whole month's wages just to lie in front of a fire for 10 minutes. The ship lurches. You feel someone's foot slide into your ribs, but you don't say anything. They're asleep, or close enough. You just shove them back gently, shift your weight, and settle in again. Your hip is numb, your back feels like it's growing barnacles. You'd cry, but tears would freeze. Eventually you doze, not sleep exactly, more like blackout. You don't dream, you don't move. You exist in a kind of suspended animation, your brain powering down just enough to let the cold sink deeper. And when the bell rings for the next shift, you sit up, bones creaking, breath clouding the air, and you realise something awful. You're colder now than when you went to sleep. There's a reason people didn't light fires on ships, and tonight, as you sit hunched against a barrel with your fingers jammed into your armpits for warmth, you really wish that reason didn't exist. But it does, and it's a good one. Fire and wood, especially old, dry, resin-slick wood, are a match made in maritime hell. The kind of fire that starts on a medieval ship doesn't politely smoulder. It erupts, dances up the rigging, swallows sails whole, and takes the entire crew down with it. One ember, one spark flicked in the wrong direction, and the sea becomes your grave. Still, knowing that doesn't make the cold easier to bear. And when it's below freezing, the wind is howling, and your teeth are clacking like a marionette's, you start to understand why some sailors tried anyway. Officially, fires were banned. No open flames. The cooking fire, if your ship even had one, was usually set up in a metal box, a brazier bolted to the deck, filled with sand or stones to trap the heat. But even that was risky, and in winter it was often doused or denied altogether. A cold ship was a safe ship, or so the saying went. Unofficially, though, sailors found ways. You've seen it yourself. A small clay pot filled with embers from the cook's hearth, smuggled below deck and kept glowing under a bucket or helmet. The heat it gives off is pitiful, barely enough to warm your hands, but it's something. And something is enough when your breath freezes to your beard and your boots feel like they're filled with stone. One night you spot a group of older sailors crouched around a crate, whispering like they're sharing secrets. When you shuffle closer, you see the faint red glow of a tiny ember pot, hidden beneath a pile of rags. It's ingenious, in a desperate sort of way. One of them holds his hands over it, fingers twitching as if trying to soak up warmth through sheer willpower. Another has his boots off, letting the heat kiss his frozen toes for 30 seconds before the next man gets a turn. You try to edge your way in, but space around the ember is rationed more carefully than food. Everyone gets 30 seconds, no more. After that, you move, or you get moved. The fire is life, and no one is hoarding it. It's not just the heat, though, it's the light. That soft, flickering orange glow feels holy, like something stolen from the gods. It casts shadows that dance across the hold, makes the wet walls shimmer, and for a moment you can pretend you're somewhere else. Somewhere better. Somewhere with a fireplace, a mug of ale, maybe even a cat curled by your feet. Then the light fades, the pot hisses, and reality drags you back under like an anchor. Let's dip into a historical detail here. Some ships, especially those on longer voyages, experimented with stone-lined fireboxes mounted above deck. They weren't elegant, but they allowed for minimal cooking and warmth in extreme cold. These setups were rare, mostly seen on Baltic trade ships or northern expeditions, but they prove something important. The cold was such a threat, sailors were willing to risk the ship itself to survive it. That's how bad winter at sea could get. Even the captains weren't immune. You once overheard yours grumbling that his ink had frozen in the pot while trying to write the log. He'd set a candle next to the ink, just close enough to thaw it but not ignite it. The whole time he muttered curses under his breath and kept glancing at the wooden walls like they were soaked in pitch. Which, to be fair, they probably were. There's another more fringe tale you heard from a shipwright once back in port. He swore that some ships were fitted with secret fire pits in the lower deck, metal-lined boxes with chimney holes running through the mast disguised as ventilation shafts. According to him, they were used in deadly cold regions far north, where even steel could shatter like glass. Most scholars call this fantasy. Too risky, too heavy. But part of you wonders, because when your fingers are turning blue and your breath is frosting your eyelashes, any fantasy starts to sound a little bit like fact. But let's be real, the majority of sailors, especially on cogs like yours, had nothing. No fire, no embers, not even a warm stone. They made do with what they had. Body heat, friction, and the sheer stubbornness to outlast another night. You've seen crewmen sleep packed so tightly together, they look like a pile of logs, and in the morning, they peel off one by one, grimacing, arms numb, legs stiff, but alive. You've taken to doing the same. When it's bad, and tonight it's very bad, you wedge yourself between two others and burrow in like a tick. No one talks about it. It's just survival. You all reek of sweat, fish, damp wool, and worse, but right now that collective stink is warmth. You keep your hands balled up in your sleeves and your nose tucked under your scarf. Every breath is shallow, slow, calculated not to lose precious body heat. You feel the ship shift beneath you. The boards creak and groan like they're complaining about being awake in this weather too. Eventually one of the officers stomps down from the deck and kicks a nearby barrel. No fire down here, I smell smoke. Everyone freezes. You hold your breath. The ember pot is gone. Vanished. Hidden like contraband beneath a false bottom in a crate of salted meat. The older sailor who'd been tending it shrugs innocently. Must be from the deck, sir. Wind's carrying it. The officer grunts and lumbers off, not entirely convinced but too cold to investigate further. Once he's gone, a few of the others chuckle. Soft, hollow. The kind of laugh that sounds more like coughing. Then, like shadows, everyone folds back into themselves. You curl back up, eyes heavy, every muscle tight against the cold. You picture a roaring hearth, bread baking, wool socks hung by a fire to dry. These thoughts keep you sane. Barely. Fire on a ship is death, but no fire. That's its own kind of slow execution. And tonight, like every night, you choose the long way out. There's a particular smell that settles into the ship after a few weeks of winter sailing, and once it hits your nose, it never quite leaves. You've already smelled sweat, of course, your own and everyone else's, but that was back in the early days when the wind was sharp and the deck still saw daylight. Now the hold has taken on a life of its own, and that life smells like damp wool, rotting food, unwashed feet, spoiled wine, rat droppings and mildew all blended together in a kind of nasal horror show. If stench were a living thing, this one would have fangs. The first time you noticed it, it was subtle, a sort of musty sourness that lingered near the bedding area. But now it's everywhere. It clings to your clothes, seeps into your blanket, and coats your tongue. You wake up with the taste of it in your mouth like you've been chewing on a soggy boot. You breathe shallowly, not to conserve energy, but because deep inhales feel like a mistake. To make it worse, the cold has sealed everything in. There are no open hatches, no sea breeze wafting through to take the edge off. Every man's breath condenses in the air and soaks back into the walls, where it stagnates. There's a slick film of condensation on everything. You touch the side of a barrel and your fingers come away wet, but not the good kind of wet. It's a kind of slimy dampness, the kind that breeds things. You once found a patch of mould growing on the underside of your blanket. No one was surprised. Another sailor discovered his cloak had sprouted something green and fuzzy. He scraped it off with a spoon, and then used the same spoon to eat breakfast. When you gagged, he just laughed. "Tastes like herbs," he said. Now, let's get into a historical fact that really brings this into focus. Hygiene on medieval ships was theoretical. Sailors rarely washed. Not just because water was precious, but because being naked in the cold could literally kill you. No one wanted to take off their clothes to wash their bodies. not when the wind could slip inside your bones. So grime layered on grime, sweat turned into a salty paste, and lice settled in like long-time tenants. The corners of the hold are the worst. That's where sailors go to relieve themselves when they can't make it to the railing. It's too dangerous in stormy weather, or in the dead of night, to fumble your way up to the deck and dangle your backside over the sea. So corners it is. Someone tried to assign a latrine barrel, but that system broke down about 3 ports ago. Now it's more of a suggestion than a rule. And when the ship rocks, let's just say the mess doesn't always stay put. In that delightful cocktail of filth, you still have to sleep. Still have to find a place to curl up and trick your body into thinking it's safe to rest. Sometimes you roll up a piece of cloth and hold it over your nose just to filter the air a bit. Doesn't help much. Everything smells like it's been fermenting in a wet cellar since last harvest. Quirky fact time. Medieval sailors believed that strong smells, especially bad ones, could cause disease. The miasma theory held that foul odours were not just unpleasant but dangerous. Some sailors tied scented herbs into little pouches and wore them around their necks or stuffed them in their hats. Lavender, rosemary, dried citrus peel if they were lucky. You tried it once, found some dried thyme in a busted supply crate and tucked it into a scrap of cloth. For a whole 5 minutes it helped. Then the thyme just smelled like everything else. Wet, mouldy despair. You get used to the rats though. That's the strange part. At first their presence made your skin crawl. You imagined them chewing through your bag, crawling over your face while you slept, nibbling at your boots. But eventually they just become part of the environment. Like the groaning beams or the ever-present cold. You see them skittering along the rafters, or vanishing into holes behind the cargo. Sometimes they squeak, sometimes they wrestle. One even dragged off a piece of hardtack you'd been saving and you just let it go. In some twisted way, they're fellow survivors. The hold is so crowded with men and gear that privacy doesn't exist. You know who snores, who talks in their sleep, who farts like a dying whale. You know who's getting sick, because the smell shifts slightly, becomes sharper, heavier. You know who hasn't moved in hours. You poke them with your foot gently at first, then harder. If they grunt or swat you away, that's good. If they don't, someone calls for the officer. That happened last week. They carried the body topside in the middle of the night and slipped it over the edge. The splash was soft. The silence after was softer. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how bad shipboard sanitation really was. Some records suggest captains impose strict cleaning routines, with daily swabbing of the decks and orders to dump waste overboard regularly. Others argue that on most vessels, especially during winter, any such routines fell apart fast. With limited fresh water, limited space, and a crew focused more on survival than hygiene, the ship became a floating petri dish. And in winter? Forget it. Nobody's swabbing ice-covered boards at midnight when they can barely feel their hands. Tonight the stink is especially strong. You think it's coming from the supply crate near your feet, the one leaking some sort of briny sludge. You shove it with your boot, but it only shifts and releases a puff of something unholy. Hugo gags next to you. Another sailor starts coughing. Someone mutters that the sea gods are punishing you. No one disagrees. And yet, you lie back down. You pull the scratchy blanket over your face. You try to breathe through your mouth. Doesn't help. You try to think of flowers, of fresh snow, of the smell of bread baking in the village oven. But all of it gets drowned out by the reality of the hold, the unrelenting stench of human bodies packed too tight, for too long, in a box that's slowly soaking in its own misery. You're not even sure if you're asleep or just unconscious with your eyes closed. But at least it's a break from smelling, from shivering, from being. That's all sleep is down here. A temporary escape from a ship that smells like it's halfway to becoming a compost heap. Tonight, you don't sleep straight through. Not that you ever really do, but this time, it's official. You've been put on the night watch, and that means your entire sleep routine, or what passes for it, is shattered. Welcome to polyphasic sleeping medieval sailor style. It's not a lifestyle choice, it's survival strategy. And by survival, of course, we mean the kind that keeps the ship from crashing into an iceberg while everyone's snoring in a pile of damp wool. The bell rings somewhere above deck and you groan before you even open your eyes. It's pitch dark, cold, your joints ache. You're so stiff it feels like you've been preserved in brine. But the bell doesn't care. The bell never does. It's the sound of obligation, of duty, of freezing your backside off in the middle of the ocean while trying not to fall asleep standing up. Your shift is 4 hours. That's the rule. 4 hours on, 4 hours off. On land, this might be manageable. At sea, during winter, it's cruel. You only just drifted off. Some shallow, feverish dream about being buried in hay, warm for once, when someone jabbed you with a boot and said your name like it was a curse. Now you're climbing stiffly up the icy ladder with your fingers already going numb, your breath puffing out in sharp clouds and your brain still 10 minutes behind your body. Up on deck, it's like another planet. The wind howls, the sails groan, and frost clings to every rope and railing. You wrap your cloak tighter and take your place near the bow, eyes scanning the black horizon for something, anything that might mean trouble. You don't even know what you're looking for. Ice? Pirates? Floating debris? A rogue whale with a grudge? It doesn't matter. You're out here because someone has to be. You shift your weight from foot to foot, trying to keep your blood moving. Your boots are soaked from yesterday's wave and frozen solid this morning, so now every step is like walking with rocks strapped to your soles. Your hands? Forget it. You shove them into your armpits and wish for mittens, or a different career. There's no talking during the watch. Not unless something's wrong. Your fellow crewman stands 10 feet away, equally frozen, equally miserable, staring blankly into the night. You exchange a glance. That's all it takes. You both understand. You're both barely holding it together. Now, here's the historical angle. Medieval ships didn't have clocks, so watches were measured with things like hourglasses, bells, or, if you were on a fancier ship, a watch glass that had to be turned every 30 minutes. Someone's job was to flip it, mark the time and ring the bell when a shift ended. Of course, on a rough night nobody trusted the timing. You could be stuck out here for 5 hours because someone forgot to flip the glass, or fell asleep and just guessed. Sailors on many medieval ships followed a watch system based loosely on dog watches later formalised in naval practice. It wasn't just about splitting the crew into shifts, it was about keeping the ship running 24/7. There was always something to do, adjusting sails, checking rigging, watching for signs of land or enemy ships, or just standing guard against the elements. Sleep came in fractured chunks, often no more than 3 or 4 hours at a time, and your body never fully adjusted. You remember asking an older sailor once, "How do you ever get used to sleeping like this?" He laughed until he coughed and said, "You don't. You just stop caring." The strange thing is your brain starts to adapt. You learn to sleep on command. You learn to fall asleep within minutes, no matter how cold, how loud, how uncomfortable. If someone told you to lie down on a pile of axes and get 20 minutes of rest, you'd do it without question. The moment you lie down, your body collapses inward like a folding chair. You're asleep before your head hits the makeshift pillow, but it's never restful, it's just paused. Down below, the rest of the crew is already in their strange rotation. Some are snoring, others tossing. 1 or 2 are sitting up, rocking slowly, trying to lull themselves back to sleep between watches. You see a man you don't recognise walking the edges of the hold with his eyes open, but clearly somewhere else entirely. Sleepwalking? Or just lost in the haze? You don't ask. Another fringe fact. Sailors often slept with one eye half open, literally. It wasn't superstition, just a nervous habit developed from being interrupted so often. The human brain, when forced into broken sleep, adapts by staying partially alert even while unconscious. It's why so many of the older sailors jolt awake if you so much as step near their blanket. Some of them don't even use blankets anymore. Just lean against barrels and sleep sitting up, arms crossed, chin to chest. You've tried that. It works, kind of. Especially if you're exhausted enough to pass out in any position. Once, during a break between shifts, you nodded off on a coil of rope with your head against the anchor post. Your neck was crooked for 3 days, but it was worth it for 45 uninterrupted minutes of unconsciousness. This kind of sleep does things to your brain. Your dreams become strange, fragmented, full of sound and sensation but no logic. You dream of being pulled underwater, of walking across the sea, of voices calling your name from inside the ship's planks. You wake up disoriented, not sure if you're still dreaming. One sailor swore he saw a woman with hair like seaweed walking between the sleeping bodies one night. No one believed him, but everyone slept a little closer together after that. The worst part is waking up again. Every time it feels like you've just started to drift. You're pulled back into the world by the bell, or a shout, or someone nudging you with their boot. There's no slow return, no gentle easing out of sleep. It's sudden, jarring, violent. And then you're back on your feet, back on deck, back staring into the dark sea, waiting for the next shift to end. You've stopped counting the hours. Time is meaningless. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. Your mind drifts constantly. But you hold your post. You do your watch. Because that's the rhythm now. Sleep isn't a right, it's a privilege. And on this ship, it's a broken, fragmented, freezing privilege. Earned in 4-hour intervals, stolen between storms, and never ever enough. Sleep finally comes, if only in fragments, and you're just starting to sink into that numb half-slumber when the storm rolls in like it's got a personal vendetta. One moment, there's the usual groaning of the hull, the creak of ropes, the low snore symphony of exhausted sailors. The next, the ship bucks so violently that you're nearly thrown off your pallet, which, let's be honest, is just a square of frayed sailcloth that was probably used to wrap pigs at some point. Everything changes in an instant. The wind howls like it's trying to rip the mast clean off. The boards above your head thunder with heavy boots. Someone shouts, then someone else shouts louder. There's a horrible cracking noise and you don't want to know what it was. You sit up, heart already hammering, still tangled in your cloak and half asleep, because of course the sea would choose now, to try and kill you. Water begins to drip from above, faster than usual. That's never good. You crawl out of your spot, slipping as the ship pitches hard to starboard. Someone else tumbles across the floor with a grunt and slams into a crate. You hear a groan, but no one moves to help. Everyone's too busy trying to figure out whether they're about to die. The storm hammers the ship like it's offended by its existence. Wind shrieks through the ropes like a banshee choir. You can feel the boards flex under your feet. You brace yourself against a beam, knees bent, every muscle clenched as the ship rocks and heaves. You wonder if the entire world has tilted, if this is the part where the bottom splits open and you all get swallowed into the black. Let's talk logistics. When the sea gets angry, sleeping becomes a luxury even more laughable than usual. There's no hope of rest, not when you're being tossed around like dice in a gambling den. Some sailors try to wedge themselves into corners or curl around barrels to keep from sliding. Others just lie flat and hang on, praying that whatever cargo crate topples next doesn't pick them as its target. You don't sleep through a storm, you endure it. There's historical evidence that storms at sea were as much psychological torture as physical. Some sailors developed rituals to ward off bad weather. Scraps of cloth tied to the rigging, whispered prayers to St. Elmo, coins nailed to the mast for luck. You've seen a few yourself. Earlier this week, one of the older sailors carved a crude sun symbol into the side of his bunk. "Keeps the dark out," he muttered. Didn't seem to be working. Tonight nobody's pretending. The cold is bad enough without adding the sheer terror of the ocean trying to shake you loose. You can't see the waves, but you feel them. Each one slams into the hull like a fist. The whole ship groans and shudders, and every time you think, this is it. This is the one that splits the planks. The worst part is below deck, where you are. When water seeps in during a storm, it doesn't just make things damp. It pools, it rushes, it soaks into your bedding, into your pack, into your boots. You're suddenly ankle-deep in icy brine, sloshing with every roll of the ship. You try to lift your feet onto a barrel, but it shifts beneath you, and you almost go tumbling. The floor is chaos, barrels rolling, rope coils unwinding, and all of it lurching like it's alive and furious. Someone near you starts retching. It's inevitable. Seasickness is a constant companion, especially when the ship pitches violently. You try not to breathe too deeply. The smell of vomit joins the already rich aroma of mould, sweat, and despair. You wrap your scarf tighter and press your back to the wall, praying it holds. You want to run up to the deck just to see the sky, but that's suicide in weather like this. Sailors get swept overboard all the time. One wrong step and you're gone, just another splash in the darkness. No one can hear you scream over the wind. If you fall, you vanish. That's the rule. So you stay put and ride it out, teeth chattering, muscles cramping, heart racing like a drum. Quirky fact of the night. Some sailors swore that sleeping through a storm brought bad luck. They believed the sea didn't like being ignored, and if you dared to close your eyes during her tantrum, she'd punish you personally. Which is hilarious because there's no way you're sleeping through this. Even blinking feels dangerous. You feel like if you take your eyes off the ship for 1 second, it'll crumble around you. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the violence slows, not stops, but eases. The ship stops its wild rolling and settles into a slower rhythm. The yelling above fades. You hear the sails being adjusted, the clatter of ropes, the cautious return of structure. You're still soaked, still shaking. But the worst, for now, is over. You slump against a barrel and close your eyes. Not to sleep, just to exist less intensely. Your head throbs. Your mouth is dry. Your cloak is drenched. Everything you own is wet and cold, but you're alive, and no one's been flung off the ship that you know of. This is when the exhaustion really hits. You've been awake for what feels like days. Your body is past tired, aching, buzzing, raw. You feel like you've been pounded flat. When you finally lie down again, your muscles tremble just from trying to relax. The deck's still rocking, but it's gentle now, like the ship is trying to apologize. The hold is quiet again. Someone coughs. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone snores, softly, bravely. You close your eyes and try to join them. It's not rest, not really. Your nerves are too fried. But your body doesn't care. It drags you under like a wave, pulling you into a sleep so deep it barely counts as conscious. The storm has passed, but the memory of it stays behind, curling into the corners of your mind, waiting to haunt the next half-sleep. When you wake again, if that word even applies anymore, it's with the taste of something foul on your tongue, and the weight of exhaustion draped over you like wet iron. Your body aches in that dull, all-over way that doesn't even feel localized anymore. It's just one long, continuous complaint from head to toe. Your mouth is dry, your lips are cracked, and your tongue feels like it's been sanded down with a rope made of salt. In short, you're having a great morning. So naturally this is when someone hands you a cup of grog. It sloshes in a battered wooden mug, steaming faintly in the freezing air, and you hesitate for a second before lifting it to your lips. It smells like bad decisions and old socks. Technically, it's just watered-down ale or cheap wine with a few mystery spices, maybe a chunk of lemon if you're aboard a fancier ship, or trading near Portugal. But on your cog, it's whatever was at the bottom of the barrel, possibly with a splash of vinegar or seawater. Still, it's warm. That's the magic trick. You drink melted boots if it meant 5 minutes of internal warmth. The first sip burns. Not in a satisfying, civilized way. More like your throat has decided to protest this indignity with a rash of coughing. Your fellow sailor claps you on the back. "Aye," he says, grinning through blackened teeth. "Puts hair on your soul, don't it?" You nod, eyes watering, and take another gulp. The taste doesn't get better, but the warmth spreads slowly down your chest, and for a moment, you almost feel human again. Or close enough. This apparently is the ship's idea of breakfast. No porridge this morning, no biscuit, just grog. It's meant to get your blood moving, shake off the chill and, let's be honest, take the edge off whatever trauma you collected last night when the storm nearly turned you into fish food. Let's pause here for a little historical context. Grog, as it's popularly known, didn't become a formal naval staple until the 18th century, when the British Navy started mixing rum with water to stretch rations and prevent drunken mutiny. But on earlier medieval ships, the principle was already there. Alcohol diluted with water, warmed over a controlled fire, if allowed, and used to brace the crew against cold and sickness. Wine, beer, ale, mead, anything with a bit of punch in it was fair game. Now, whether it helped or just numbed people into tolerating the misery is still debated by historians. Some argue it helped ward off cold by dilating blood vessels and creating a false sense of warmth, while others point out that alcohol dehydrates the body and could actually worsen the effects of cold. But you know what? Out here, you don't care about debates. You care that your fingers feel slightly less like icicles, and your stomach isn't actively rebelling against you. What nobody talks about is how much of shipboard life depends on alcohol. Grog before sleep. Grog after storms. Grog to celebrate surviving another week without someone going overboard or bursting into hives from the dried fish. It becomes a ritual. You drink to dull the aches, to thaw your gut, to trick your brain into thinking that tonight might not be quite as bad. And then, when you lie down, that warmth clings to you, for a little while. It spreads through your core and makes the cold seem further away. Not gone, but distant. It relaxes your jaw, softens the gnawing pain in your joints. Sometimes, if you drink enough, you even forget how uncomfortable the floor is. But it comes at a price. You know the rule. Drink just enough to sleep, but not enough to oversleep. If you miss your next watch, you're in for it. Flogging, probably, or being made to scrub the deck barefoot in freezing water. That happened to a guy last month. He snuck a little extra grog before his off-watch and slept through the bell. The quartermaster found him drooling in a pile of sailcloth and hauled him up by the collar. He was lucky the punishment was public humiliation and not something sharper. Quirky fact, Some captains made up their own rules about drink. One was known for rationing grog by how well a sailor performed during the day. Hauling faster meant a heavier pour. Another would mix in hot pepper or mustard seed to wake the blood, which sounds helpful until you realise it turns your stomach into a war zone. You try not to drink too much, but sometimes the ship rocks just wrong, or your blanket's soaked through, or Hugo won't stop snoring in that wheezy wet way that makes you want to shove a fish in his mouth. On those nights the mug comes out early. It helps, mostly. But tonight the drink doesn't carry you away. You lie down, as usual, tucked in your corner with your arms wrapped around your chest like a corpse preparing for burial, and you wait. The warmth fades fast. It always does. And when it does, the cold rushes back in with a vengeance. Your limbs go stiff. Your toes curl. Your fingers ache. Your breath comes in foggy bursts. Worse, the grog messes with your dreams. You don't fall asleep. You fall sideways into a pit of half-formed images and jumbled memories. You see your childhood home, except the floor is made of ice. Your mother's voice echoes from somewhere below deck, calling you to dinner. But when you go to answer, seawater fills your mouth. You wake gasping, heart racing, confused. You sit up, look around, remember where you are. Still on the ship, still freezing, still you. The scholarly debate continues. Was grog a practical tool or a dangerous crutch? You suspect both. It numbs the body, sure, but it also blurs the mind, and you need your mind sharp out here. Too many things can go wrong when you're half asleep and pickled. Still, tomorrow night you'll drink again, not because you want to, but because everyone else does. Because in the howling cold, in the sleepless shifts, in the wet rot of the hold, the grog is the one thing that says you made it another day. And that right now is enough. The wind's gone still tonight, and that should be a blessing, but instead it leaves everything eerily quiet. Too quiet. The sails hang slack, limp like dead flags. The only sounds are the slow creaking of the ship's hull, the occasional splash of water against the boards, and the sniffling of someone 2 bodies over who's come down with whatever chest cough has been making the rounds. It's the sort of stillness that creeps into your spine and makes you feel like the ocean is holding its breath, like it's waiting for something. But you're not worried about that right now. You're worried about how to not freeze to death in your sleep again. Tonight you're trying a new trick. Insulation. You've been collecting scraps for days, bits of discarded sailcloth, a ratty piece of fur from a broken glove, even a small stack of hay that someone spilled during cargo loading and didn't bother sweeping up. That hay, by the way, smells like it was harvested during the last plague year, but it's dry, and that's a win. You build yourself a little nest in the corner of the hold, wedge between a broken barrel and the wall, and stuff it with everything you've hoarded like a hibernating animal. The hay goes down first, layered thick for cushioning and warmth, then your cloak, then your blanket. Then, on top of all that, the burlap sack you've been using to store your spare pair of socks, one of which is now being used as a mitten. You're inventing luxury in a place where rats have higher life expectancy than the crew. Here's the historical bit. While we tend to think of medieval sailors as dirty and half mad, and yeah, that's not totally wrong, they were also incredibly resourceful. They had to be. Without modern materials, without dry rooms or proper bedding, they turned whatever they had into protection. Old sails became insulation, empty grain sacks became bedding. Animal skins, even if half-eaten by lice or rot, were sewn together into makeshift sleeping bags. And the further north you sailed, the more inventive the crew had to become. You remember one guy, big fellow from the east missing a few teeth and most of one ear, who stuffed sheep wool into his clothes every night. Not cloth, raw wool. It itched like madness, and after a week he was red all over, but he said it was the only way he could keep warm. Another sailor used 2 flat planks, one on either side of his legs, and tied them with rope to create a kind of wooden burrito. He said it helped trap heat. Or maybe he was just insane. You lie back in your nest and test the setup. It's not bad. The hay pokes through the cloth in a few places, but you can feel the difference. The cold isn't slicing into you the way it usually does. It's more of a dull ache now, like an old injury you've just decided to live with. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, bury your face in the crook of your elbow, and close your eyes. Then the ship creaks. Not the normal groan of old wood expanding and shifting, but a sharper, hollow sound. You freeze, wait, listen. Nothing. A few heartbeats pass, someone nearby coughs, someone else mutters in their sleep. You relax just a little and adjust your cloak. The fringe fact for tonight. Some sailors swore by lining their bedding with crushed pine needles if they could get them before a voyage. The resin acted as both a deodorizer and mild insect repellent, plus the smell reminded them of forests, of land. You don't have pine needles, but you do have some dried rosemary you stole from a cook's supply crate 2 ports back. You crush a pinch between your fingers and scatter it inside your blanket. The scent is faint but soothing, like a memory of something far away and clean. There's still the issue of moisture. Everything is always slightly damp, not soaked, not dripping, just damp enough to feel like you're trying to sleep inside someone's breath. But tonight, you've layered well enough that it's tolerable. You shift once more, roll onto your side and feel the hay give a little under your hip. It's not comfortable. That concept doesn't really exist here, but it's the closest you've come in weeks. Then there's the itch. You knew it was coming. Hay always itches. But you try to ignore it. You try to focus on your breathing, slow and steady. The faint sound of waves tapping the hull, the occasional snore, the rustle of bodies adjusting, shifting, sharing warmth through proximity. Your little den of hay and burlap starts to work, lulling you closer to something resembling sleep. Here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Some historians argue that sailors didn't actually sleep below deck unless weather forced them to. They believe many preferred to sleep on deck, bundled in cloaks and oilcloth for fresh air and fewer smells. Others insist that only officers had that luxury, and most common sailors had no choice but to cram into the hold every night, especially in winter. The truth is probably a mix of both. Either way, the methods for staying warm weren't standardised. Sailors made it up as they went, each man his own test subject in a long, miserable experiment in shipboard insulation. Back in your nest, sleep finally starts to creep in. Your limbs relax. The hay shifts a little with your breathing. Your fingers are curled against your chest, your face hidden beneath 3 layers of fabric. You've created your own microclimate, a tiny cocoon of stolen warmth in a world of damp rot and wood and wind. And then, a rat runs across your foot. You jolt so hard you almost punch yourself in the face. The rat, unimpressed, vanishes into the shadows. You lie there, heart pounding, staring into the dark. No screams. No one else moved. This is normal now. You don't even get angry. Just tuck your feet up tighter under your blanket and go back to pretending you're not here. That you're somewhere warm, dry and clean. Somewhere with walls that don't leak and food that doesn't smell like salted regret. You'll sleep again, eventually. The nest helps. The hay helps. The rosemary helps. Even the rat in some backward way helps. Because if it's still alive, that means the ship hasn't sunk yet. And that's a comforting thought. You scratch at your neck for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Not gently either. This is the kind of frantic, sleep-deprived digging that says something's alive in there, and it's winning. At first, you tell yourself it's just the coarse wool rubbing wrong, or maybe a little hay still stuck from your new nest. But then the itching spreads. Neck, scalp, shoulder, along your ribs. That twitchy pinprick feeling like something tiny and determined is crawling over your skin. Congratulations, you've got bed bugs, or lice, or fleas. Honestly, at this point it's a pest buffet, and you're the entree. It's one of those aspects of shipboard sleep that nobody warns you about. Not because it's a secret, but because it's too obvious to mention. When you pack 40 or 50 men into a wooden box for weeks on end without proper washing, bedding rotation, or access to fresh clothing, something is going to start biting. Probably several somethings. And they don't wait politely for morning either. They work the night shift, just like you. The itching hits hardest in the quiet hours, when you're trying to get a few minutes of rest. It starts as a tickle, then becomes an all-out war. You squirm, scratch, shift, swear. If you're too aggressive, you wake up your neighbour, who growls at you in 3 different dialects and threatens to feed you to the fish. If you're not aggressive enough, you lie there chewing your tongue to keep from clawing your own skin off. Historically speaking, ship infestations were not only common, they were expected. Bedbugs, lice, and fleas were simply part of the sailor's experience, as unavoidable as damp clothes or bad food. Ships that hadn't been cleaned properly between voyages, most of them, let's be honest, would become mobile breeding grounds for insects. Once they found their way into your blankets or tunic seams, that was it. They weren't leaving unless you burned everything you owned, and since fire was, not encouraged aboard a wooden ship, that wasn't really an option. Some ships tried fumigation. They'd dock, unload, and, on rare, hopeful days, smoke the holds with burning herbs or sulphur. But winter? No chance. No one's opening the ship to fresh air when the wind could slice through your lungs. So instead, you and the bugs bunk together like reluctant roommates. You've taken to checking your sleeves and seams before sleep. Not that it helps. The little pests hide in crevices, under collar folds, inside the seams of your trousers. There's a guy on board, one of the quiet ones, who swears by coating the inside of his shirt with ash. Claims it suffocates the lice. You tried it once and ended up looking like a chimney sweep with an attitude problem. Plus it didn't work. And then there are the superstitions. Some of the older sailors insist that rubbing garlic on your skin keeps the bugs away. Others say you should sleep with iron near your feet. One crewman even tied a dead flea to his wrist on a string, like some kind of protective talisman. "Let this one suffer for the rest," he said solemnly, like he was making a sacrifice to the insect gods. It didn't help. He was still scratching the next morning. The debate among historians is surprisingly rich when it comes to this topic. Some claim the prevalence of bedbugs and lice was so bad it influenced the behaviour of entire crews, shorter sleep cycles, increased irritability, even violence. Others suggest that the sailors became numb to it over time, just like they adapted to bad food and worse weather. You're somewhere in the middle. You haven't gotten used to it, but your threshold for what constitutes a bad night has shifted dramatically. Now, if you wake up and you're only a little itchy and not actively bleeding from scratching, you count it as a success. You shift in your blanket trying to find a position that doesn't press the fabric against your neck. It's pointless. You can already feel the red bumps forming. You know what comes next. Scratching until it scabs, then the scabs itching worse than the bites. The cycle is eternal. Hugo next to you has given up entirely and just sleeps with his tunic off, arms crossed over his chest like a disgruntled ghost. "If they're going to eat me," he mutters one night, "might as well give them a table." You hear scratching all the time now, not just from yourself but from every direction. Nails on skin. The subtle shift of someone rolling over to reach that one spot just out of reach. It's a chorus of low-grade misery. Nobody talks about it during the day, but at night it becomes the background noise of life at sea. And here's the worst part. It messes with your sleep even more. Not just because of the discomfort, but because it's yet another way your body's on alert. You're already fighting cold, hunger, noise, shifting cargo, rolling waves, rats, and snoring. Now add parasitic sleep sabotage to the list. You close your eyes, drift off, and bam, bite, itch, twitch, awake again. You get to the point where you start sleeping in shifts within your shift. 20 minutes of sleep, 10 minutes of scratching. Repeat. It's absurd, it's exhausting, and it's your new reality. You consider burning your blanket, then remember that you'd have to spend the rest of the trip without one. You consider scrubbing everything with seawater, but it's freezing, and that would just lead to frostbite. So instead, you do what every sailor has done before you. Complain about it, scratch until you bleed, and keep going. Tonight you try wrapping your scarf tighter, tucking the ends into your tunic to block the little crawlers from reaching your neck. It helps, slightly. You wedge your hands under your arms, pull your knees to your chest and breathe slowly. You focus on the rhythm of the waves, the distant flap of sailcloth, the groan of the mast, anything to distract yourself. Eventually sleep comes, thin, broken, crawling with irritation, but sleep nonetheless. And in your dreams you're on land, lying in a clean bed, in a clean room. No bugs, no itch, just stillness, peace. Until, somewhere in that dream, you scratch your neck and realise it's still there. Even your subconscious can't escape the infestation. There's a moment every night right as you start slipping into sleep when your brain finally stops cataloguing all the ways it's miserable. The cold fades into background noise. The lice for once take a break from their midnight banquet. The groans and mutters of the ship around you blur into a single low hum, and for just a breath, it feels like you might finally get some rest. Then come the dreams. Not dreams exactly. They're more like hallucinations with a personal grudge. One minute you're wrapped in your ragged cloak on a bed of straw and sailcloth, and the next, your mind is dragging you down into some half-real world where you're drowning in the bilge or falling off the mast. Sometimes you dream that the ship is sinking, slowly, silently, and that no one notices but you. You scream and scream, but your mouth is full of salt water, and when you wake up, it's with your face pressed into your sleeve, lungs burning, throat dry. Nobody talks about dreams here. They talk about work, about the wind, about how many days to the next port if the weather holds. But not about what happens when they close their eyes, and yet you can tell. You can tell by the way they bolt upright in the middle of the night, breath heaving, the way some refuse to sleep in the same spot twice, the way one man mumbled his dead brother's name 3 nights in a row, even though he swears he's an only child. You've heard stories too. Sailors whispering during night watch, swapping tales about nightmares that feel too real. A boy on the last voyage who screamed in his sleep and threw himself overboard before anyone could grab him. Another who stopped talking completely after a week of waking up with fingernail marks on his chest, and no one else in the hold ever claimed responsibility. These are just stories, of course. But you've been here long enough to know that the sea does something to your mind. The motion, the cold, the smell, the endless grey, it works its way inside you. It doesn't just haunt your waking hours, it haunts everything. Here's a historical angle for you. Medieval sailors were deeply superstitious about sleep. Many believed that your soul left your body when you dreamed, floating freely through the world. That was fine on land, where your soul might wander through the woods or visit home, but at sea, that was dangerous. Too many things out there, things that might catch your soul, keep it, replace it, or just forget to let it return by dawn. To guard against this, some sailors would sleep with small talismans, bits of bone, twisted iron nails, scraps of parchment scribbled with symbols they couldn't even read. You've seen them. Hugo sleeps with a tiny charm tucked into his boot, carved with something that might be a face or might just be bad carving. One man swears by a feather tied into his sleeve. Keeps the night birds away, he says. You don't ask what that means. You have nothing like that. Just your blanket, your scarf, your thoughts. And those don't do much against what you saw last night. Because last night you dreamed you were back home, sitting by the fire, bread in hand, warmth soaking into your frozen fingers. You could smell the wood smoke, hear your mother humming in the kitchen. But then the fire started to hiss. The shadows stretched longer than they should have. And when you looked again, the house was empty. Stone cold, window cracked, snow blowing in. You tried to move, to call out, but you were frozen in place, paralyzed, helpless. You woke up gasping, face wet with sweat despite the cold, heart pounding like you'd run for miles. And for a moment, you weren't sure which version of reality was worse. Quirky fact of the night. In some coastal regions, sailors believed that dreaming of drowning was a sign you'd live a long life, because the sea had already taken you in your dreams and didn't need you in the real world. Others believed it meant the opposite, that the sea was calling and that soon you'd answer. It depended on who you asked, how drunk they were, and how recently someone had been lost overboard. Tonight you don't want to sleep, not because of the cold or the bugs, or even the man 2 spots down who snores like he's chewing gravel. It's the dreams. You're not sure your mind has any warmth left in it. Even your fantasies have frostbite now. You lie back, pulling your blanket tight around your shoulders. You focus on your breathing, in, out, the creak of the beams, the soft splash of water outside the hull, someone muttering in their sleep. You squeeze your eyes shut and try to think of anything else. Your favourite tree from childhood, a warm meal, the feeling of sun on your face. You build it carefully in your mind like a shelter. It almost works. You start to drift, mind slipping sideways. The ship rocks gently beneath you. Your body surrenders, and then the dream begins again. Not the same one, but just as vivid. This time you're below deck, same as now, except everyone around you is gone. Blankets lie empty. The ship is still, too still. You get up, walk to the ladder, climb to the deck. The sky is dark. No stars, no moon, just a black dome over a black sea. And there, standing at the helm, is someone with their back turned. You call out. They don't move. You step closer. Still nothing. You reach out, hand trembling, and just as your fingers touch their shoulder, they turn, and you jolt awake. Heart racing, breath short. The same position, the same hold, but your blanket is halfway off and your boot is gone. Just one. You sit up, squinting into the dark. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the usual groaning of the ship and the shuffle of sleepers. But for the rest of the night you don't shut your eyes again. Not even once. You don't fear the cold anymore. You fear your own mind. You're almost asleep when it happens again. A sudden light pressure near your foot. Not the weight of a boot or a rolled blanket. Number. This is skittering, quick, and unbothered by your presence. You don't even flinch anymore. You just sigh, open one eye and whisper, "Go on then," like you're giving it permission. Because what else can you do? The rat doesn't answer. It never does. But it also doesn't leave. It pauses for a second, likely checking if you're dead, then pads across your ankle like it's strolling through a hallway made just for it. And that's when it hits you. You're not alone. You've never been alone. Not since you boarded this floating wooden coffin. The rats have been here the whole time, scurrying under barrels, nesting in sacks, climbing the rigging at night with a confidence no human could match. They're not passengers. They're residents. You're the intruder. You shuffle your leg to dislodge it. It thuds onto the floor with a soft pat and disappears into the darkness, as if annoyed by your lack of hospitality. Somewhere nearby, someone hisses and swats the air. Probably their turn now. The rats make the rounds like waiters at a banquet. Let's get this out of the way. Rats are a fact of life on medieval ships. There's no getting rid of them. They live in the walls, behind the planking, beneath the deck boards. They chew through ropes, through barrels, through your patience. Some even claim the smarter ones can open knots if there's food on the other side. And on a ship where everything is stored, stacked or tied down, that's a real concern. But worse than their appetites is the way they invade your sleeping space. You could get used to them in the cargo hold. You could write off their thumps and squeaks as distant. But when one is curled under your blanket or sniffing your ear in the dark or biting through the toe of your only remaining boot, it becomes personal. You've seen rats the size of small cats. One of them strolled through the hold last week like it owned the place, dragging a chunk of hardtack behind it like a prize. No one stopped it. A few men even cheered it on. There's a kind of bitter respect for an animal that thrives in the same horrible conditions as you, and still manages to be fatter, faster, and better fed. And yes, you've heard the stories, the ones where rats are a sign. If they all suddenly disappear, it means the ship is cursed. If they swarm together at once, it's a warning that something terrible is about to happen. You used to laugh at those tales. Now you just watch them a little more closely than you used to. Quirky fact of the night. Sailors in the Baltic once tried to train a ship's cat to guard sleeping quarters from rats. They even fashioned it a little collar from spare rope. It lasted 2 weeks before the cat jumped ship at port and never came back. Smart cat. You've thought about trying to block them out, tying the bottom of your blanket shut like a sack, tucking yourself in like a parcel. But then what? Suffocate in your sleep? Wake up soaked in sweat and rat droppings? There's no winning. So instead, you adapt. You sleep with one leg tucked, the other slightly elevated. You put your boots on top of your pack, knowing full well that a rat can still climb, but telling yourself you've made it just slightly more annoying for them. That counts as a victory. There's a running joke among the crew. If you wake up to a rat chewing your hair, it means you're finally salty enough to be accepted as part of the ship. One sailor claims it happened to him twice in the same night. He took it as a blessing, but the truth is, the rats are warm. That's the worst part. On freezing nights, when you're shivering and desperate, you don't kick them away. You let them settle, just close enough to share some body heat. You tell yourself it's mutual survival, that you're not slipping into some awful codependent relationship with a disease-ridden stowaway. And yet, there's one rat in particular. You're not naming it because that feels like crossing a line, but it's always the same one. Small notch on its left ear, slight limp. Comes by around the same time every night, sniffs around your pack and then sits on the barrel near your head like it's judging you. You've stopped shooing it. Once, in a moment of weakness, you even shared a crumb of biscuit. It took it, stared at you like it expected more and vanished. Now, every night it returns. There's a scholarly debate, because of course there is, about how rats influence life aboard ships. Some historians claim they were tolerated, even encouraged as early warning systems. Rats would react to leaks, shifting cargo and subtle changes in the ship's movement before humans noticed. Others argue they were just pests, filthy, destructive and potentially plague-bearing. But those are land-based opinions. On a ship, especially in winter, practicality wins. If a rat chews a hole in your food supply, it's a menace. If it sleeps next to your foot and keeps you warm, it's a co-worker. You lie back again, carefully this time, feeling around to make sure nothing is under your blanket. You hear a soft rustle, then the tapping of tiny claws on the barrel beside you. You glance sideways, the rat's back looking smug. You close your eyes and mutter, "You better be warm." It stays. Tonight sleep comes easier, not because you're more comfortable, but because your standards have bottomed out completely. If you're not being chewed on, shouted at, or frozen solid, it qualifies as decent rest. The rat shifts beside you, cleaning its face with tiny hands. It's disgusting. It's endearing. You can't decide which. Eventually your breathing slows, your muscles relax, you stop thinking about lice and cold and dreams and everything else. There's just the soft sound of the ship moving through water, the low mutter of sleepers, and the tiny rhythmic squeaks of a rat cleaning its tail beside your head. You sleep. You wake once, briefly, to find the rat curled against your ankle. You don't move. The first thing you notice tonight isn't the cold or the rats, or even Hugo snoring like he's swallowing gravel. It's your stomach. It's flipping. Slowly at first, just a dull roll, like the ship's motion has finally synced up with your guts. Then it gets worse. Each sway of the ship tilts your insides like a bucket half full of old soup. You groan and press your arm against your belly, hoping the feeling passes. It doesn't. Welcome to Seasickness, version 17. It hits different in winter, somehow meaner. You're already weakened from weeks of broken sleep and terrible food, and now your own body has decided to revolt against the idea of being horizontal. Lying down feels like you're being gently, but persistently, punched in the gut by Poseidon himself. You sit up slowly, hoping a change in posture will settle things. Mistake. The moment your head lifts, the nausea swells. Your vision pulses. Your mouth fills with saliva. You lurch forward and barely miss painting your boots with a truly regrettable stew of grog, biscuit, and despair. You manage to vomit into an empty burlap sack, possibly the most useful thing it's ever done. The worst part? No one even reacts. A few glance over in the dim light, blink once and return to their sleep positions. It's just part of the background now. There's no space for shame or privacy in this floating dormitory of doom. Everyone has puked. Everyone will puke again. You just added your chorus to the grand orchestral groan of human misery. Seasickness is old news to sailors. There are accounts from as far back as people have been putting wood on water. Medieval texts describe the Green Terror with morbid fascination. Some thought it was a test of character, others a form of punishment from the gods. A few brave or foolish medics suggested holding a live eel in one's mouth to realign the humours. You'd rather die. And here's the fun twist. It often hits harder when the ship is at rest. When the sea goes still and the sails slacken, the ship doesn't stop moving. It just starts moving in a slow, bobbing circle, rolling gently like a cradle from hell. It messes with your balance, with your senses. It tricks your body into thinking you're falling over and over again. You could be lying perfectly flat, and your stomach still thinks you're in a barrel tumbling down a hill. You try to lie back down, gingerly this time, head propped up, legs curled. You keep the sack nearby just in case. Your body is shaking now, not from cold, but from fatigue and the leftover heaves. There's nothing left in you to throw up. You're just making dry, pitiful noises into a sack that now smells like regret and bile. Fantastic. Someone passes you a chunk of hard biscuit. "Settle your gut," he mutters. You don't know his name, you don't even look at him. You just take it, nibble at the corner, and pretend it's helping. Quirky fact. Some sailors carried small stones in their pockets, and when they started to feel sick, they'd suck on one. The idea was that the motion of sucking distracted the brain from the motion of the ship. Others swore by chewing dried ginger or mint if they could get it. One crewman on board keeps a little pouch of dried orange peel from a port 6 weeks back. He chews it slowly every night like a lifeline. You try the biscuit again, still hard as bone. You dunk it in your water flask, count to 10, and then try a bite. It doesn't help the nausea, but it gives you something to focus on. Anything to stop your brain from spinning. Anything to ignore the slow drip of water from the hull above your head, or the sway of the lantern that's tied loosely to a post nearby. Some historians argue that constant seasickness was one of the main reasons sailors drank so heavily. Not just to cope, but to blunt the sensation. Enough grog, and you don't notice your stomach flipping. Enough wine, and you stop caring. But there's a dangerous line there, and plenty of men have crossed it, getting so drunk they can't hold the rail and end up slipping into the sea, quietly erased by their own coping strategy. You won't let that be you, not tonight. Still, sleep feels impossible. The nausea comes in waves matching the gentle sway of the ship, You keep your eyes closed, but that only makes it worse. The dark is too alive, too full of motion. So you open your eyes and stare into the gloom, at the way the shadows shift, at the silhouette of the rat now curled beneath the bench, clearly unbothered. It's not sick, it's thriving. You envy it. Eventually your body reaches some miserable equilibrium, not healed, not better, just too tired to keep protesting. The nausea fades into the background. The trembling slows. Your mouth still tastes like something died in it, but at least it's not opening involuntarily anymore. You settle back using your bundled cloak as a pillow. You rest your palm flat against your stomach like you're trying to physically hold it in place. You breathe slowly. You close your eyes. And now, the candlelight. There's a single lantern still lit across the hold, its flames swaying with the ship's motion. It throws long shadows across the beams, across the faces of sleeping men. The flame flickers wildly, stretching thin and bright before curling in on itself again. Watching it, you find a strange rhythm, a hypnotic little dance that pulls your mind into a slower current. The nausea dulls further, the cold creeps back in, but you welcome it now. Cold is stillness. Cold is clarity. Cold is at least familiar. Sleep, or something like it, creeps in sideways. You don't dream this time. No frostbitten hallucinations. No phantom footsteps. Just a deep, hollow quiet. When you wake, the biscuit is still in your hand. The rat has taken a bite. It starts with a hum. Not the wind through the sails or the moan of the hull. This is human, warm and worn in tone. At first, you think someone's just clearing their throat, maybe softly grumbling in their sleep. But then another voice joins, then a third. Low, breathy, almost hesitant. And then suddenly it clicks. They're singing. It's not the kind of singing you'd hear in a chapel, or anything you'd call melodic. This is more like murmuring with rhythm, a kind of communal whisper that clings to the air and threads itself between the beams like smoke. You lie still in your damp blanket, head turned toward the sound, and listen. The words are old, maybe older than the ship, definitely older than your understanding, a mix of languages or maybe just thick accents blurring into each other. Some verses rhyme, others don't. Some sailors harmonise, others mumble out of tune. But together it works. It's not beautiful, but it feels right, like it belongs in this place, in this frozen, creaking hull, among sleep-starved men and rats. And then comes the beat, feet tapping softly against the boards, a hand slapping rhythm into a crate, someone thumping a rope coil for percussion. A sea shanty is being born in real time, half remembered, half invented, stitched together from scraps of older tunes and reshaped by cold breath and boredom. You feel your foot tapping before you even realise it. The rhythm is simple, repetitive, and strangely comforting. It matches the sway of the ship, matches your heartbeat, matches the collective need for something to drown out the silence that usually wraps around sleep like a wet shroud. Let's talk about sea shanties for a moment. Historically, they served a practical purpose, coordinating labour during rowing, hauling, or loading cargo. But that's only half the truth. They were also a form of survival, a way to keep minds sharp, hearts connected, and tempers in check during long, grinding voyages. Especially in winter, when everything else is grey and freezing, singing is a protest against despair. These aren't the kind of songs you'd write down. Most of them start and end with the crew that sings them. They change night to night. The verses twist based on who's sick, who snored too loud, who broke wind near the barrels. One line might be about lost love, the next about someone's bunions. It doesn't matter. The point isn't performance, it's unity. Tonight's song has a slow start, but soon enough more voices join in. Deep ones, cracked ones. One voice so off-key it circles back around to charming. There's laughter when someone stumbles over a line. Then someone else throws in a ridiculous verse about the captain's terrible beard, and a ripple of amusement rolls through the hold. You're grinning, which is weird. You can't remember the last time your face made that shape voluntarily. One of the sailors near the front, young bright eyes, sings like he actually likes being here, starts a call and response. Oh, the wind, she bites and tears the skin, he belts, and the rest of the crew answers, but the grog, she warms the soul within. Another verse, more laughter, someone claps, someone coughs but claps anyway. You don't sing, not yet. But your lips move, your throat tightens, wanting to join in. Your fingers tap out the beat on your damp blanket. It's stupid, it's loud, it's undisciplined, and it's the warmest thing you've felt in days. Quirky fact, there were certain songs that could only be sung at night. Not because of superstition, but because of tone. The night shanties, if you want to call them that, were slower, more sombre, meant for passing the time during long watches or lulling the crew into uneasy rest. Some were lullabies for grown men who hadn't heard a soft word in weeks. Others were ghost stories set to a beat, tales of drowned sailors who sang from beneath the waves, or mermaids with teeth like knives who lured men overboard with impossible melodies. You hear one of those songs now. The melody slows, darkens. The lyrics shift to something about black sails on a frozen tide, and the man with ropes for hands. The mood changes. Not unpleasantly, but enough to quiet the rowdy ones. The rhythm stays, but softer now. It feels like rocking in a cradle made of salt and shadow. And just like that, people begin to lie back down. One by one, the voices fade. The tapping stops. The song hangs in the air for a few long moments, then disappears like mist. You're still smiling a little. It doesn't make the hold any warmer. Your blanket is still wet. The rat is still nestled under your boot like a smug little foot warmer. But something's shifted. The silence doesn't feel as cruel. The darkness doesn't feel so hollow. You're not alone. Not really. Not in this moment. You lie back, pulling your blanket to your chin, eyes half closed. And for once, you don't think about how many hours until your next shift, or how bad your back hurts, or whether there's mould growing in your boot. You think about the beat, the voices, the ridiculous verse about the captain's beard. Some scholars argue that sea shanties were just tools, practical devices for managing work, but others suggest something deeper, that these songs weren't just for coordination, but for communion, a shared language made of rhythm and misery and breath, something that let tired, frozen men remember they were still human. Tonight, you believe that second group, and when you finally drift off, it's not because you're warm or full or comfortable, it's because you've been sung to sleep. You wake up with something sitting on your chest. Not someone, that would be disturbing in a very different way, but something heavy, oppressive, like a thick invisible slab pressing down on your ribs. Your eyes snap open, and at first there's nothing, just darkness. The same faint outlines of barrels and rope coils, the same damp wood above you, creaking quietly with the ship's slow roll. But the pressure doesn't lift. You can't move, can't speak, and worse, you can't breathe properly. You try to wiggle your fingers, they twitch. Good. But your chest, locked tight. You feel your heart thudding, too fast, like it's trying to punch its way out through your sternum. You open your mouth to call out, but no sound comes, and then, out of the corner of your eye, you see it. A shadow, not a person, not a rat, just a shape, crouched near your bunk just at the edge of your vision, still, silent, watching. Your brain is screaming, your body is frozen, and just as suddenly as it started, it's gone. The pressure lifts. Your lungs inflate with a desperate gasp. You bolt upright, drenched in cold sweat. You look around, wild-eyed, heart-hammering, trying to find it. But the corner is empty. Nothing there but your blanket, a coil of rope, and that smug rat blinking at you like he had a bad dream too. You sit there for a while, arms wrapped around your knees, shaking from the inside out. Welcome to sleep paralysis, medieval edition. Nobody had a name for it back then, of course, but they knew about it. Every sailor has a story. They don't use medical terms like REM cycles or disrupted neurotransmitters. They talk about the night wait, the sea hag, the deck demon. Sailors say that when you sleep too close to the hull, where the water presses cold and heavy against the wood, something from below crawls up to sit on your chest. Not to kill you, just to look, to see what kind of soul you've got. You heard one man swear he saw a child made of fog perched on his ribs, whispering in a language no one's ever spoken. Another claimed a woman with wet, tangled hair crawled down from the beams and pressed her face to his, just breathing, watching, waiting. And then there are the theories, that it's your soul trying to leave your body and getting stuck halfway, that the sea doesn't just take bodies, but pieces of your mind, that it's the cold itself becoming sentient, wrapping around you, whispering in your ears, pinning you down while it gets to know you from the inside out. You used to roll your eyes at those stories, but now Now you're not so sure. Let's talk historical debate. Some scholars believe medieval sailors viewed sleep as a vulnerable state, not just physically, but spiritually. With no clear understanding of the brain's nighttime behaviour, many turned to supernatural explanations. Nightmares weren't dreams, they were visitations. Sleep paralysis was proof of possession. Night terrors meant the devil, or something like him, was nearby. On land, priests might bless a home or anoint the bed frame. On a ship, you got a whisper of protection and a chunk of driftwood carved into a charm. Quirky fact: a Norse sailor's journal from the 13th century describes carving runes into the planks near his head to ward off the watchers of the tide. Whether it worked or not, no one knows, but the charm was found centuries later, still etched into the wood, its meaning worn but legible. You think about that sometimes when your fingers trace patterns into your blanket in the dark. Like, if you can just draw the right shape, you'll be safe. After your episode, sleep is off the table. Your eyes refuse to close. Every time your head dips forward, your body jerks back awake, like it remembers. Like it's afraid that if you let go again, the shadow will return. Sit back down, heavier this time, maybe stay. You glance around. A few men are tossing and turning. One is muttering too fast like he's arguing in his dreams. Another is completely still. Too still. You watch for his breath. Wait. There. He shifts, scratches, rolls over. You let yourself exhale. You're not the only one who's seen things. You can feel it in the way the others stare into corners when they think no one's watching. The way they sleep with their hands clenched tight. The way no one ever sleeps on their back if they can help it. As if they all know that being flat is an invitation. The sea doesn't just punish you with storms and cold, it gets inside you. It warps the air, the dreams, the hours between watches. It drapes a fog over your thoughts, and then pokes holes in it just big enough for the shadows to slip through. You try to reason with yourself. Maybe it was just a dream. Maybe you were so exhausted your brain turned on itself. But deep down, you know it wasn't just that. Something was there. You felt it. And worse, it felt you. You wrap your blanket tighter, even though it offers no real comfort. You sit upright, knees drawn in, staring into the dark. You won't sleep again tonight. Not really. Not unless you're willing to take the risk. Somewhere above, the ship creaks. The sails flap gently in the wind. Below, water sloshes against the hull like a quiet heartbeat. And inside, around you, the hold shifts with sleeping bodies and unseen eyes. Maybe you'll dream again tomorrow night. Maybe next time the shadow will speak. There's no bell loud enough to wake you tonight. Not when sleep finally takes you down like a sack of stones. But the cold does. Not the usual chill you've gotten used to either. This is different. This is sharp, violent, like you've been buried in snow while still breathing. Your eyes snap open and for a second, you think you've gone blind. The hold is pitch black. Your hands are stiff, frozen into claws inside your sleeves. You can't even feel your feet. And then you remember, it's your watch. The worst one. The midnight watch. You sit up slowly, every joint complaining, your breath fogging into a pale cloud. Your lips are cracked. Your nose is running. You try to sniff, but it hurts too much. It's like your entire face has been left outside overnight, which, to be fair, it kind of has. You pull on your cloak, tighten your belt, and shove your already damp boots onto your feet, wincing as the leather bends stiffly around your frozen toes. Crawling out of the hold and up onto the deck at this hour feels like climbing into a punishment. The wind catches you immediately, slamming into your chest like a fist of ice. It sucks the air right out of your lungs and slaps tears from your eyes. You stagger forward, grabbing a rail to steady yourself and peer out into the abyss. The sea is silent tonight. No roaring waves, no crashing spray, just a long, endless blackness that stretches in every direction. The sky is cloudless, and the stars hang heavy above you, glowing like frostbitten lanterns. It's eerily calm, like the whole world has taken a breath and forgotten to let it out. You take your position near the bow, tucking your face into your scarf and hunching your shoulders against the wind. You're supposed to watch for danger, floating ice, approaching ships, fires, flares. But mostly you're watching the dark, just watching. Here's the thing about the midnight watch in winter. It's less a shift and more a survival challenge. You're not really expected to do much. You're expected to stay alive. That's it. Stay conscious. Stay standing. Don't freeze. Don't fall. Don't drift off and topple into the sea because no one's diving in after you. Not in this water. Not at this hour. Let's talk historical protocol. On some ships, the midnight watch was split into smaller shifts in the coldest months. 2 hours on, 2 hours off, rotating with brutal efficiency. Other crews just drew straws, or rotated alphabetically, or went with the simple method of whoever lost the last dice game. You've had the shift 3 nights in a row, not because you lost anything, just because no one else volunteered, and the quartermaster's got it in for you ever since you spilled grog on his logbook. So here you are, again. Your fellow watch partner tonight is a man named Carol. Big, quiet, Dutch, maybe. He nods at you once and then resumes staring out over the water like he's trying to read something in it. You don't speak. Words just freeze midair right now, and he's not a talker anyway, but it's nice not to be alone. You stomp your feet, slap your arms. It doesn't help much. Your body feels like it's slowly curling inward, trying to protect its own warmth. Your breath ices on your scarf, building up in thin crusts that you have to crack away with your fingers. Your eyes keep drifting shut. Not from fatigue, but from something worse. That sleepy kind of cold, the kind that feels soft, gentle, like it's inviting you to rest just for a second. That's the danger. Historical accounts describe sailors freezing to death while standing up at the rail, their hands still gripping the ropes, their eyes wide open. They don't scream, they don't fall, they just stop. That's what cold does. It convinces you to let go. You clench your jaw and shake your head. Focus. You look down at the deck, watch the frost forming along the planks, tiny sparkling crystals like glass dust coating the edges of the wood. Your boots slide if you move too quickly. You plant yourself, knees slightly bent, bracing for the occasional gust of wind that feels strong enough to peel skin. Quirky fact. Some sailors try to stay warm by stuffing dried moss or grass into their boots during cold night watches. Others tucked hot stones into pouches, heated from the galley fire, before tucking them into their shirts. That's if you had a galley fire, which your ship doesn't. Not after the last one almost burned the quarterdeck down. Now, the only thing warm on board is the meagre flame flickering behind the captain's door. You glance up at the stars. They're so bright tonight it hurts. One of the brighter ones, just above the horizon, pulses like it's breathing. You stare at it for too long, and suddenly your vision starts to dance. Shapes blur at the edge of your sight. You shake your head again, slap your face, stay awake. But something's off. You look down the length of the ship and realise you can't see the stern anymore. The lantern should be glowing there, even faintly, but it's gone. Just darkness. You turn to Carol. He's still there. Still standing, still staring into the water. You say his name once, then twice. No answer. You step toward him, boots crunching against the icy deck. You reach out and touch his arm. It's stiff. Too stiff. Carol, he exhales. A long, slow breath that fogs in the air like smoke, then finally turns to look at you. His eyes are glazed, not frozen, just vacant, like he's been somewhere else entirely. He blinks once, then twice, and clears his throat. Almost nodded off, he mutters. You nod, more to yourself than him. The rest of the watch is silent. When the bell finally rings and your shift ends, you both move like statues coming back to life. Limbs cracking, faces raw. You climb below deck, not even feeling your hands anymore. Your legs are numb, your ears sting. But you're not dead. You strip off your cloak and crawl into your frozen bedding. The rat is already there, curled tight. You don't even flinch. You just press your chest against the floor and let your body thaw. Slowly, painfully. And even then, even now, you're still shivering. Because the worst part of winter watch isn't the cold. It's knowing you have to do it again tomorrow. It starts with a shiver and ends with sweat. That's how you know it's not just the cold anymore. It's something worse. You've been lying on your side for hours, curled into yourself like always, but tonight your body's wrong. There's a heat blooming from somewhere deep inside your chest, and it's not the good kind. Not the kind you welcome on a freezing night. This is sharp, burning, and completely out of place. You open your eyes slowly. Everything is spinning. Welcome to Shipboard Illness, Winter Edition. You sit up, immediately regretting it. Your head swims, your vision tunnels, and your ears are ringing like someone clanged a bell inside your skull. You press your hands to your face, and they come away clammy. Not just damp, slick. You're sweating, even though the hold is freezing. You don't know whether to laugh or cry, so instead you just lie back down, one arm over your eyes, praying for your stomach to stay where it is. The fever is here, and fevers at sea are complicated. There's no sick bay, no real medicine, just guesses and old wives' tricks passed down from some long-dead uncle who once read a herb list carved into a barn door. Someone might offer you a clove of garlic or a cloth soaked in vinegar. If you're lucky, the cook still has a crust of ginger or a mouldy lemon. If not, you ride it out. Or you don't. Your teeth start chattering again, not from cold, but from the confusion in your own body. The heat is inside you, but outside everything is damp and bitter. You try to pull your blanket tighter, but even that small movement makes your skin ache like it's been beaten. Then come the dreams. You're not sure when you fall asleep or if you ever really do. It's more like your brain just unplugs and goes somewhere else entirely. You're back home, or at least in some warped version of it, where the roof is made of sails and your bed is lined with rope instead of straw. Your mother is there, offering you soup, but when you reach for the bowl it's full of seawater and teeth. You jerk awake with a gasp, heart hammering. Hugo stirs nearby and glances over, groggy. "You dying?" he asks, voice hoarse but not unkind. "Probably," you whisper. "And good. More space." Then he rolls over. You chuckle, but it turns into a cough, deep, wet and rattling. You taste blood. Or maybe rust. You're not sure anymore. Historical detail for the night. Shipboard illnesses were the norm, not the exception. In winter, the combination of cold, moisture and poor hygiene created the perfect breeding ground for everything from common colds to full-blown scurvy, typhus, and other horrors. Doctors? Rare. Barbers doubled as medics. Treatments were crude. Cupping, bloodletting, purging with hot mustard. Yes, that's a real thing. It's exactly as pleasant as it sounds. And in the hold, there's no isolation. You're breathing the same air, sharing the same blankets, eating from the same knives. If one man gets sick, 10 more follow. It's only a matter of time. You've seen it happen. A week ago, a man 2 hammocks over started coughing. By day 3, he was pale and wheezing. By day 5, he was gone. Nobody even moved to carry his body until the end of the watch. They just pulled a tarp over him and stepped around him like cargo. At the next port he was quietly removed, wrapped in canvas, and thrown into the sea with no more ceremony than a dropped bucket. You lie back again, pulling the rough blanket over your face, trying to hide from the cold, the light, and the way your brain keeps sparking with weird, fever dream thoughts. You start counting breaths. It's the only thing that grounds you. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Until something interrupts. Voices. Soft chanting. You open your eyes and see 3 men near the stern, heads bent, whispering what sounds like a prayer. Not to God, at least not the one you recognize. It's something older, or just stranger. You don't ask, you don't want to know. One of them is burning something in a small dish. The smoke curls in the air, sharp and herbal. It smells like rosemary and burnt leather. Or maybe that's just the fever talking. Quirky fact. Sailors sometimes held nighttime smoke rituals to cleanse the sick air. Not because they knew about germs, but because they believed the smoke could drive out evil spirits, or at the very least bad smells. It was equal parts medicine, superstition, and desperate attempt to make themselves feel like they were doing something. Someone sees you watching. They come over quietly and press a small object into your hand. A charm, a carved piece of bone wrapped in twine. For strength, they murmur. Don't drop it. You nod. Or maybe your head just falls forward. Either way, the charm stays clutched in your hand as you lie back down. You feel yourself slipping again, not in a dramatic, cinematic way. More like your thoughts are melting, dripping through the cracks in your skull. You forget what time it is, what day, if it's morning or night. You stop caring about the cold, the lice, the rats. Everything is distant, like you're underwater but breathing just fine. And then, stillness, not real stillness. The ship is always moving, but your mind is still. For the first time in weeks, the fever has taken over, and you're not even fighting it anymore. You surrender to it. Let it wrap around you like steam. You forget to be afraid. You sleep. Somewhere in that sleep you see fireflies, dozens of them, floating above the sea. You try to reach them, but your arms are too heavy. One of them lands on your nose. It's warm. You think maybe you're not on a ship anymore. Then the rat licks your ear. You jolt awake again, groaning. The fever hasn't broken, but it hasn't won either, and in the dark, surrounded by coughs, prayers and shadows, you find a strange sort of victory. You're still here. There's a sound coming from the other side of the hold, soft, rhythmic and far too familiar. At first you think it's another rat nosing around in someone's biscuit pouch, but no, it's deeper than that. Human, breathy. Two people, trying very hard to be quiet and not quite succeeding. You blink, still half fevered, your body a pulsing furnace of aches, and slowly tilt your head toward the noise. Someone's having a sleepover, the illegal kind. You lie there in stunned silence for a moment, too groggy to be judgmental, too curious to look away. A blanket shifts, a boot thuds softly against the hull. There's a faint giggle, quickly stifled. You hear murmuring, too low to make out the words, but intimate enough to make the intent obvious. It's not the first time this has happened. Just the first time you've been awake enough to notice. For weeks you've heard whispers, rumours of crewmen slipping away for warmth and company, though never said too directly. This isn't the kind of ship where rules are written down, but there's an unspoken code, especially about fraternisation below deck. It's not banned officially, but it's dangerous. If not physically, then socially. If someone gets caught, it leads to fights, resentment, power plays. Because privacy doesn't exist here. Everything is everyone's business, even the things you wish weren't. Still, there's something undeniably human about it. Two people finding comfort in each other during the most miserable winter of your life. You're not even mad, just jealous. You shift your body under the blanket, ignoring how every muscle protests, and stare at the ceiling like it might provide moral clarity. Now for the historical reality. Shipboard intimacy among medieval sailors was taboo, but not uncommon. Most vessels were entirely male, which meant emotional and sometimes physical bonds formed out of necessity, loneliness, or simple proximity. In port, sailors visited brothels or spent coin in whatever comfort houses the dockside offered. But at sea, well, people are people. Cold, terrified and trapped people, even more so. Accounts are scarce, of course. Few sailors wrote journals, and those who did rarely confessed to forbidden bunkmates. But fringe records exist. Trial notes, church documents, accusations levelled by bitter crewmates. Some captains turned a blind eye. Others punished harshly, citing moral decay or fear of distraction. The lines between companionship, survival, and affection were blurred at best, especially when the alternative was freezing alone in the dark. Tonight you understand that more than ever. There's something about lying in your own sweat, shaking from fever, with no one beside you but a flea-ridden rat, that makes even the most forbidden closeness feel forgivable. You hear a sigh, soft, content, and your chest tightens, though not from illness this time. You roll onto your side and close your eyes, but it doesn't help. The sound is still there, delicate and constant, like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to you. You tell yourself it's fine, that you're not envious, that you're stronger for sleeping alone, but that's a lie, and you know it. Quirky fact. Some medieval sailors believed that intimacy at sea cursed the voyage, not because of sin or scandal, but because the sea itself was jealous. Female in many seafaring myths, the sea demanded full devotion. Distractions, especially romantic ones, invited her wrath. Some ships even had rituals to purify the deck if a tryst was suspected. Salt circles, cold water thrown across the beams. One vessel supposedly kept a carved figurehead blindfolded with cloth, so it wouldn't see anything and bring bad luck. You don't think the sea cares what happens in the hold. It's too busy trying to freeze your eyeballs in your skull. Still, something about this moment lingers. The low murmur, the careful shifting of limbs, the brief, quiet laughter between two people who found something resembling joy on a ship that otherwise offers none. And beneath your irritation, your fever, your bone-deep loneliness, you feel a kind of reluctant respect. Because it's not just about lust or boredom, it's about comfort, touch, warmth. To be reminded that you're still human, still alive, still capable of something soft in a place that's anything but. You remember a night 3 weeks ago when a younger sailor slipped into his friend's blanket and they stayed that way, pressed together like children hiding from a storm. No one said anything, not even the first mate. Everyone just turned away and gave them space, as if by silent agreement that grief needed company, no matter how it showed up. That's the truth of it, you think. The ship breaks everyone differently. Some shout, some drink, some disappear into themselves and never quite return, and some, in the darkest corners of the coldest nights, reach for each other, not for pleasure, but for proof that they still exist. You adjust your blanket again, pulling it tighter, not out of modesty, out of defence, against the loneliness, against the ache, against the knowledge that even rats have more contact than you do right now. There's a shuffle, then silence. The moment ends, or pauses at least. You hear one of them roll away. The blanket settles. A quiet breath, slowing into sleep. The kind of sleep you haven't known in weeks. You lie awake, fever burning behind your eyes, and think about touch. About what it must feel like to fall asleep to the warmth of another person, instead of the smell of mould and the sound of someone vomiting 3 feet away. You press your hands together under the blanket, pretending just for a moment that they belong to someone else. Eventually exhaustion wins, not warmth, not comfort, not peace, just raw, merciful fatigue. And as you sink into sleep, you don't dream of sex or love or romance. You dream of a hand holding yours. That's it. No face, no body, just that small human kindness. And when you wake, you swear for a second it was real. There's a new sound tonight. A low, persistent drip somewhere in the darkness. At first, it blends into the usual noises. Creaking beams, soft snores, the occasional shuffle of a half-conscious sailor changing sides. But the longer you lie there, the more insistent it becomes. Drip, drip, drip. Measured, rhythmic, like a metronome of dread. You try to ignore it, but in the dead silence of the early hours, it becomes all you can hear. Drip. You sit up, slowly. The fever hasn't left you completely, but it's retreated just enough to give your limbs back their weight and your thoughts back their edge. You blink, trying to get your eyes to adjust, and lean over the side of your bunk, peering into the hold. Drip. It's coming from somewhere forward, near the hull, and that's the problem, because dripping means water, and water, in the ship, inside the hull, means something is leaking. You slide out of your bedding and carefully step over the snoring forms of your bunkmates. The floor is cold beneath your feet, but no longer shocking. Your body's adapted in ways that don't feel entirely natural anymore. You make your way across the hold, following the sound with grim curiosity, like you already know what you're about to find but need to see it for yourself. There it is. Near the base of the hull, behind a stack of crates lashed together with damp rope, you see it. A steady drip of seawater leaking from between 2 planks. It's thin. No rush, no burst, no dramatic spray. Just a single, defiant thread of ocean, bleeding into the hold 1 drop at a time. You reach out and touch it. Freezing, sharp, salt. You feel a spike of something close to panic, but it dies fast. You're too tired, too used to disaster now. You just stare at it for a moment longer, then turn around and shuffle back to your bunk like you've just seen a ghost and decided not to mention it. You'll tell someone, probably, eventually. Maybe at watch change, maybe never. Leaks happen. Everyone knows that. Medieval ships weren't built for luxury or longevity. They were built to move cargo or soldiers or the occasional desperate pilgrim, and the winter made everything worse. The wood contracts in the cold, the seams between planks shrink, tar freezes, cracks and flakes away. A ship that was watertight in August might weep like a grieving widow by December. Historically, crews carried pitch or wax to reseal problem areas, but doing that mid-voyage, mid-winter, mid-freezing your eyebrows off was more theory than practice. Usually you stuffed cloth into the seam and prayed. Some captains kept a dedicated leak crew, a handful of unlucky souls tasked with crawling into the darkest parts of the hull to patch things in real time, usually by candlelight and in several inches of cold seawater. You're grateful not to be one of them, for now. You crawl back into your bedding and try not to think about the drip. It continues, indifferent to your dread. Drip, drip. You picture it slowly filling the hold, inch by inch, until it reaches your blanket, until it kisses your skin, until you wake up floating. Then you laugh, quietly, bitterly. Not because it's funny, but because you've hit that particular tier of misery where humour is the only tool left that hasn't frozen over. You're lying here in the dark, surrounded by men who would probably trample you for a warm sock, and this is what breaks you. A tiny leak. quirky fact of the night. Some sailors believed that leaks were the ship's way of speaking, a sign that it was unhappy or needed attention. They'd tap around the leaking plank and whisper apologies, offer thanks, even mutter promises to fix it once they got to shore. If the leak stopped, it was taken as forgiveness. If it got worse, someone would throw salt into the water as an offering to the sea. You've got nothing to offer, just a headache and a rat who's gone missing tonight. Probably off giving someone else foot warmth and parasites. Traitor. You pull the blanket back over your head and try to get warm again. Not just physically, mentally. You need to retreat into that foggy, numb space where sleep is possible and your brain stops running damage projections. But that drip won't stop. Now that you've noticed it, it owns you. Drip. You start making deals in your head. If the leak holds until morning, you'll tell someone. If it stops, you'll pretend it never happened. If the rat comes back, maybe you'll get 5 minutes of real sleep. You try not to imagine what happens if it doesn't hold. What it looks like when the water comes faster, when it soaks through your clothes, when the barrels start floating. You've heard stories, half whispers from older sailors who survived sinkings, how it always started slow, unnoticeable, a little water around the boots, a sudden coldness where your blanket used to be dry. Then the cargo shifts, then the lanterns are extinguished, then the shouting starts. But that's not tonight. Not yet. You're still here. Still dry, mostly. Still breathing in and out, slow and steady, like that will protect you. Like the ocean can't reach you if you pretend not to notice it. There's a scholarly debate, by the way, about how often medieval ships actually sank due to hull leaks. Some argue that it was rare, an overblown fear stoked by landlubber mythmakers. Others point to records, logs and salvage reports that suggest it was very common, especially in winter. The truth, as always, probably sits somewhere soggy in the middle. You start humming to yourself, a shanty from the other night, the one about the jealous sea. The melody is broken and your voice is hoarse, but it helps. Not much, just enough. Eventually your body relaxes, not because the leak stops, it doesn't, but because you can't do anything about it. And the brain, when fully exhausted, is pretty good at giving up. You sleep, shallow, flickering, like a candle that might go out at any second. When you wake, the drip is still going, but so are you. It's strange. The things that start to matter after you've been on a medieval ship through a brutal winter. At first, it's survival, food, warmth, a dry place to lie down without losing a toe to frostbite or a finger to rope burn. Then it's endurance, how many nights you can go without sleep, how many weeks without comfort. But eventually, after all of that, when you've been reduced to your raw, shivering, sleep-deprived self, the things that start to matter are even smaller, like the smell. You'd think by now you'd be used to it, that your nose would just shut off, and, to some degree it has. For weeks, you've lived in a soup of body odour, wet wool, rotting provisions, rat droppings, unwashed hair, spilled grog, and the sour tang of seawater. Every inch of this ship carries its own note in the grand orchestra of stench. But tonight, it hits you differently. You wake up gagging. Not violently, not with panic, but with the dry, sour wrench of someone who's just had enough. Your scarf is still over your face, damp with your breath. Your blanket reeks of mildew. Your shirt smells like the underside of a dock in July. And then there's your own body. You dare to lift one arm and take a sniff. Big mistake. Your eyes water. You don't even smell human anymore. More like some combination of fermented laundry and damp livestock. You sit up slowly and glance around the hold. Everyone else is still buried in their own stink cocoons. No one seems bothered, but you are. Suddenly, it's unbearable. You grab your cloak and boots, shuffle stiffly to your feet and make your way toward the ladder. You don't ask permission. You don't care if it's your shift or someone else's. You just need air. The moment you open the hatch and step onto the deck, the cold punches you in the face. But this time, it's welcome. It smells clean, sharp, alive. You drink it in like a starving man eats. You fill your lungs until your chest aches. It's not warm, it's not friendly, but it's honest. And that's more than you can say for the air below deck. You wander to the ship's side, steadying yourself against the rail and glance out at the sea. Moonlight dances across the water, silver threads stretched across black velvet. The sky is clear, the stars brilliant and sharp. It's so quiet you can hear the sails flutter, hear the distant creak of rigging. No one else is up, just you and the night. Then you do something absurd and you start stripping, boots first, then cloak, then tunic. You stop at your breeches. Modesty still has a slight edge over insanity, but otherwise, you're bare-chested in the winter wind. It's brutal. It feels like knives, but it also feels cleansing. You find a bucket of seawater tied off near the rail, left from the last deck scrubbing. You pull it up with shaking arms, take a breath, and dump it over your head. It's agony, like being punched by the ocean itself. You gasp, stagger, nearly fall. But when you straighten again, dripping and shivering, it's like a fog has lifted from your body. The stink is still there, ground into your skin after weeks of grime. But it's less. It's better. You do it again. By the third bucket, your teeth are chattering so violently you can't see straight. But now your hair doesn't feel crusted. Your arms don't feel like they've been dipped in glue. You feel raw, yes. Frozen. Absolutely. But alive. And somehow that's enough. Historically, cleanliness on medieval ships was more myth than practice. Most sailors washed only when they hit port, and even then it depended on access to fresh water. Winter made it nearly impossible, but some men, often those with religious routines or just sheer stubbornness, still made the effort. They bathed with seawater when they could, despite the risk of shock or hypothermia. And if they couldn't wash, they'd scrape the grime off with blunt knives or bits of rough cloth. Personal hygiene wasn't about comfort. It was about not becoming unrecognisable to yourself. You grab your shirt, frozen now, and slap it against the rail. You beat the sleeves, the collar, the hem, trying to knock out some of the stink and damp. You won't win, not entirely, but every bit helps. You stretch it out on the deck to freeze dry and shiver while you wait, arms tucked tight, lips blue. That's when you hear a voice. Didn't know we had a mermaid aboard? You turn and see the boatswain, old, wrinkled like a dried apple, beard full of frost. He's leaning against the mast, watching you like he's half amused, half impressed. Couldn't sleep, you say through chattering teeth. He nods. Aye, ship'll do that to you. Cold's good for clearing the head, though. Makes you remember who you are. You don't answer, mostly because your jaw won't cooperate. He tosses you a piece of burlap. Dry off before you die. We need you miserable, not dead. You take it, wrap it around your shoulders and sit on a coil of rope, shivering quietly while your shirt stiffens into a board nearby. Quirky fact. Some sailors believe that washing during a voyage brought bad luck, that washing away dirt was like washing away protection. Others believe the opposite, that staying dirty attracted evil spirits. In truth, it was probably more practical than either. Clean people got fewer infections, or at the very least smelled less like rotting fish. You sit there until your bones ache, but not from fever anymore, from clarity. The fever broke sometime in the night, maybe between the second and third bucket. Or maybe the sea just took it, like she takes everything else. You're still sick, still cold, still sleep-deprived, but you're back in control. Your skin is steaming in the wind, your nose is running, your fingers are purple, and you feel clean. You gather your half-frozen clothes, dress slowly, and head back below deck. The smell hits you instantly, but this time, it doesn't overpower you. You curl back into your nest, pull the rat-hollowed blanket over your shoulders, and settle in. The stink is still there. But now it's just one of many things. Not the worst of them, not even close. The days blur now, not in that poetic, dreamlike way. No, this is more like everything smudged together in one long grey smear of misery. You wake, you work, you sleep, sort of, and then you do it all again. Time has stopped meaning anything useful. There's no sunrise, no cheerful morning bell, no change of pace or scenery. Just the same black sea, the same aching cold, and the same splintery boards pressed into your spine each night. Today, though, something's different. Something smells different. And for once, it's not worse. You lift your head, sniff the air and blink, confused. Your nose has adjusted to a truly terrifying spectrum of odours over the past few weeks. You've learned to distinguish between wet rope, rotting cabbage, mouldy sailcloth, and the particular tang of feet that haven't seen a wash basin since summer. But this smell is warm, familiar, edible. You push yourself upright and shuffle toward the source, ignoring the ache in your knees and the stiffness in your back. The rat skitters along beside you. Like it too, wants to see what this is all about. Together, you and your reluctant emotional support vermin follow the scent toward the galley hatch. And there it is. Soup. Or something pretending to be soup anyway. You peer down into a battered metal pot balanced over a low flame. Steam rises off the surface in lazy curls, and inside you see a sludge of root vegetables, a few bits of meat, maybe, and what appears to be barley or rice, an honest-to-God warm meal. You stare at it for a moment like it's going to vanish if you blink too hard. One of the ship's cooks, a man who looks like a boiled owl, nods toward a stack of wooden bowls. "Go on," he grunts. "It's your day." Your day? You forgot ships even had those. You ladle out a serving, careful not to spill, and retreat back toward the hold with your hands cupped around the bowl like it's made of gold. You don't even make it back to your bedroll. You sit down on a coil of rope, spoon in hand, and inhale deeply. It's not good. Let's get that out of the way. The meat is stringy. The broth is greasy. The carrots are boiled into some sort of emotional breakdown, and there's a weird bitterness you can't quite place. Like someone stirred it with a stick they found in a churchyard. But it's hot, it's food, and it doesn't come in a biscuit shape. That's enough. You eat slowly, not just to savour it, but to keep your stomach from panicking. It's been living on hardtack and dried fish scraps for so long that anything resembling nutrition might send it into a crisis. Every bite warms your throat, then your chest, then slowly, reluctantly your fingertips. Other crew are eating too, scattered across the deck and below, huddled around their bowls like monks guarding relics. No one talks much. There's no energy for that. But the silence feels different today. Less empty. More like a shared truce. Here's your historical fact. Ship meals were rarely warm in winter. Fires were dangerous aboard wooden ships, and lighting one in rough seas was asking to burn everyone alive. Most cooking was done in fair weather or not at all. Cold meat, cold fish, stale bread. If you were lucky. When the cook did risk a fire, it was usually for something basic. Gruel, stew, or what sailors called loblolly, a mush of whatever hadn't gone off yet. Today's meal is, by that standard, a culinary miracle. There's a fringe debate among maritime historians about how nutrition, or lack thereof, shaped behaviour and discipline on these voyages. Some argue that hunger made men more obedient, easier to control. Others insist that the morale benefits of one warm meal were enough to reduce desertions, mutiny, or worse. You're not a scholar, but right now, you definitely betray someone for seconds. You finish your bowl and sit with it in your lap, soaking up the lingering warmth. The rat eyes it, whiskers twitching. You tip it gently toward him, letting him lick the last of the broth. He seems almost grateful. Almost. A light snow begins to fall, just a few lazy flakes drifting down onto the deck. You watch them land on the railing and melt instantly. It's beautiful in a cruel, pointless sort of way. Like the sky's trying to apologise but isn't really trying. Someone near the mast starts singing again, one of the slower shanties from nights past. The melody is soft, steady, a little mournful. You hum along under your breath, the tune wrapping around you like a second blanket. Quirky fact, some sailors believed that soup made with bones gave strength not just to the body, but to the soul, a kind of protection against weakness. On some ships, they'd save the biggest bone from every stew, dry it, carve it with cymbals, and hang it from the beams above their bunks. You once laughed at that kind of thing. Now, you think about asking the cook for a leftover shin. You spend a few more minutes on deck just breathing. The cold is still there, but it feels outside you again, not inside your bones like it did last week. Your fingers have colour. Your toes move. Your stomach is full. You're not comfortable exactly, but you're better. Eventually you return to the hold, the empty bowl tucked under your arm. You crawl back into your bedding. The rat follows and settles near your knee. You don't mind anymore. The hold smells a little less terrible, or maybe you just smell better. Sleep comes easier than you expect. There's no pressure on your chest, no shadow in the corner, no dreams of sinking, just darkness. Still, quiet, heavy with shared exhaustion. For the first time in days, you dream not of drowning, but of walking, barefoot through grass. The sun is warm on your back. The breeze smells like bread. You don't even care if it's real. The weather breaks sometime in the night. You don't know when. You're too far under to notice the shift, too tangled in that half-sleep where dreams and memory blend together like melting ice in bilge water. But when you stir, slowly, stiffly, like a man recovering from a winter-long duel with death, you can feel it. Not warmth, not quite, but something less cold. The air doesn't bite your face. The blanket no longer feels like wrapping yourself in a wet grave shroud. The ship groans a little less, like it wants to split open. You blink your eyes open and notice the hold is brighter. Not from a lantern, from sunlight. Sunlight. You sit up fast, nearly cracking your skull on the beam above. It hurts, but you barely notice. Your body's been aching for so long that pain is just background noise now. What matters is the golden, filtered glow slipping through the open hatch above. Pale, yes, but warm enough to be real. Real enough to mean one thing. The storm's finally broken. You stumble up the ladder like someone who's been buried alive and clawed his way to the surface. The sun catches your eyes, and you have to shield them. It's blinding after weeks of grey, but in the best possible way. Your lungs fill with air that isn't soaked in mildew or sweat. It tastes like salt and wind. For the first time in what feels like years, you breathe. The deck is soaked, of course. Patches of slush and half-melted snow cling to the edges of crates, but the ice is pulling back, retreating like a beaten animal. Puddles shimmer in the sun. The sails, ragged and heavy from weeks of frozen damp, flap lazily now in the gentler breeze. And the crew, they're everywhere, moving like ghosts reborn. No shouting, no wild celebration, just quiet relief, passed from man to man like a secret. No one's smiling, not really, but no one's scowling either. You lean against the rail and look out over the water. It's still dark, still vast, but it's not angry anymore. It laps gently against the hull, no longer trying to murder you in your sleep. In the distance, the horizon has shape again, no longer just a wall of fog. For the first time in weeks, you can tell where the sky ends and the sea begins, and for the first time, you feel like you might actually get somewhere. Let's talk facts. In medieval times, winter voyages were gambles. Ships weren't designed for comfort or ice. Storms could blow a cog or carrack off course by hundreds of miles. Many never made it back. Others drifted for weeks, trapped in ice floes or blown into desolate reaches with no hope of resupply. The ones that did survive the journey often arrived with half their crew dead or dying. But there was one thing most surviving logs agreed on. When the sun finally returned, it felt like salvation. You feel that now. The boatswain walks past and claps you on the shoulder. Not hard, just enough to let you know he's still breathing. "Looks like the old girl's giving us a chance," he mutters. Then he nods toward the rigging. "Don't waste it." The next hour is work. Real work. Not the kind that drags on just to keep your limbs from going stiff, but the kind with purpose. You help scrape ice from the lines, check knots, bail out one of the smaller boats that had nearly filled with sleet and seawater. Every task hurts, but none of it feels pointless anymore. Below deck, the mood has shifted too. The air's still foul, but slightly less oppressive. The drip from the leak, slower now. Someone packed it with tar-soaked cloth during the night. You don't even remember hearing them do it. The rat is back, curled next to your bedroll like nothing's changed. Maybe it hasn't. For him. But for you, everything's changed. Quirky fact. Some sailors swore that after a long winter, the ship itself would feel lighter once the sun returned. They claimed the wood swelled less, the sails dried quicker, the hull rode higher in the water. Most likely it was psychological, but still, it speaks to something true. That even a tiny shift in the environment could feel like a revolution. You get a warm drink that afternoon, grog, mostly rum and hot water with maybe a hint of lime. It burns going down, but in a good way. You sit on the deck, cup in hand, and watch the clouds roll lazily across the sky. The sun's not strong, but it's steady. It rests on your shoulders like a blessing. You think about everything that's happened. The cold, the fever, the leak, the rat, the dreams, the strange tenderness of a whispered song, the bizarre comfort of a terrible soup, the way you stopped fearing death not because it went away, but because you ran out of energy to care. You survived, not heroically, not cleanly, but you made it. There's a scholarly debate, of course, there always is. Some argue that medieval sailors were more resilient because they lived closer to death, had fewer illusions about comfort, about fairness. Others say no, they suffered more because they didn't know how to care for themselves. No medicine, no understanding of nutrition, of hygiene, of mental health. But tonight, you think neither side really gets it. You didn't survive because of what you knew. You survived because of what you endured, and that's different. Night comes slowly, but it doesn't hit as hard. The wind is softer. The stars are back, bright and glittering. You sit on the deck longer than usual, just breathing, just being. No shift to dread. No frostbite creeping up your toes, just silence, shared among the living. Eventually you go back below. The hold feels smaller now somehow, less like a crypt, more like a den, a place for sleeping, not dying. You crawl into your bedroll, pull the blanket over your chest and let your eyes close. There's no shadow this time, no weight on your chest, no dreams of drowning. You sleep, deep, still, whole. The winter hasn't ended, but the worst of it has passed, and you're still here.